Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, November 17th meeting of the Finance Committee. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16th, 2020, the Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting, please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, I will take a roll call of the attendees. Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Here.
Mr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Mr. Maxwell.
Here.
And I'm here, and Ms. Nersessian is absent, duly noted. Okay, so I saw Keith. So we'll start by going over the draft warrant message that was sent out, just because we're going to wait a few minutes to see if the chair of the budget subcommittee of the school committee joins us. So did everybody get a chance to look at it? That's the first thing I would say.
Yes, I looked at it.
And was there? I didn't get any substantive changes. In fact, I didn't get any changes from anybody in the last day. So if anybody, as I said, there are numbers that have to be updated, but does anybody have any comments about the general framework, any of the language? Everybody good with it the way it was written?
Overall, yeah, I just had one note that I didn't think qualified for material. So under reserves, once you actually get the total balance, they're going to say a percentage of your omnibus budget.
Okay, I'll add that in there.
Well, when you're done.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Alfred.
Can we add in the capital spending from the spring to do a total fiscal?
That's 21? In there.
Is it? Am I missing it?
Yeah. Oh, so if you look under capital spending,
yep.
It says in July town meeting approved 1,038,834 in capital spending.
Sorry, I was just looking at the bottom.
1,038,834.
Okay.
That number is right. I took that right from the warrant from July. And I shouldn't say that. I took that from our recommendations in July. So do you want some further discussion of that, or do you want just to leave it the way it is, or do you want me to add somewhere else?
I guess this is a broader, we're spending a lot of money.
Right.
Everywhere.
Yes, we are.
Not just here, but everywhere. And I'm just wondering how well, I'm not so comfortable with some of the things, but it, I appear to be losing on some of those, but I don't know how we message that.
Well, we had a big favorability in free cash. That's sort of some of it, but one of the things I'm concerned about is, even though we had a great favorability this year, and we have a vaccine around the horizon and things should still, hopefully we'll improve. We're still sort of, we don't know that, and I think we're still in for another, 6 to 9 months of pretty difficult times until, hopefully, we can get the vaccines actually are as effective as they say they are, and we are sort of cruising by second half of 21, the first half of fiscal 22. But I'm still concerned about second half of 2021. Mm-hmm.
And we're spending a lot of money now that, that being said, we're also reducing the first tax rate, and so that's good. So, it's tough to sort of say, yeah, we should do that, but then also we shouldn't, spend it on the things that we know we're going to need to spend on anyway.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mr. Maxwell, you had your hand up?
So, Dan, I agree with you that we should highlight it, but I think Ken got there. So he has these sentences: the Finance Committee is recommending 1.135 in additional capital spending, bringing the total capital spend for FY21 to just under 2, significantly more.
We don't message why we're okay with that, if that's in fact something that we're okay with.
So I guess the question is, what would you suggest? I'm not
And that
opposed.
doesn't include all the capital spent through CARES, correct? That's just town capital.
That's what you say that again? I missed the first
That
part.
doesn't include the capital that was spent through CARES from CARES funds.
That is correct, right? Because that was not appropriated. That was not town meeting approved. That was select board controlled.
Right. But I'm
So-
just saying, but some of it was.
But in theory, but just to be fair, in theory, that was COVID related monies, right? In other words, it wasn't
Well,
like when you say capital spending, it's not like we bought a fire truck with the CARES money, you know?
well, no, we did buy Chromebooks though.
Right, but that was to outfit the grades that didn't have them when we needed them.
And I look forward to hearing the school's presentation on why we need more Chromebooks now. But what my point is, I guess we did just buy a lot of Chromebooks, and so why are we buying more Chromebooks? And I know Ann Louise is going to kill me for it, but I'm on the damn Chromebooks.
So, okay, well, let's, for the moment,
Anyway, I think I would like
Ann?
Good ask.
just hang on a second, Ann Louise.
I would like to add
Finish
some-
talk about the message first.
I would like to add some sort of line about why we are recommending this. We say it's significantly more than annual appropriation approved in July. Why are we okay with that?
Okay, well, so I guess what I would say to you is suggest the language you want to put in there.
Well, I'm not really okay with it, so I don't know. So I'm just sort of. I mean, I'm.
But you voted for everything, Ken. I mean, Dan.
Do we vote?
So you had to be in favor of it to a certain extent.
We haven't
So
voted. We haven't. No, I've not voted for all of it. I mean, I did not.
We haven't voted for the capital yet.
We haven't voted for the capital yet. And I haven't voted for all. I did not vote for one of the articles or two of the articles. I forget.
okay.
And we haven't voted on some of them yet. So
Okay,
if we're going to
so
do this, I think that we owe. Saying something is we're spending significantly more money during a recession
mhm.
than we normally do, and not then giving any kind of explanation for why we think this is prudent, seems like we're missing the second half of sort of the equation. And I'm not saying that we don't necessarily have a defendable reason and rationale for doing it. It's just that we need to present one.
But we
Okay.
traditionally spend money on capital in the fall.
No. But the total dollar amount is more than we normally spend, and certainly more than we set out. So why are we okay with that?
Well, okay, my answer to that would be the total dollar amount isn't that much more than what we spent in prior years. Like the last few years, we've been spending about $2 million, which is why we were trying to raise the capital appropriation in the operating budget up higher, right? Because we knew we were spending beyond that. But we've been supplementing it with free cash, which is what we're doing this year, right? The other aspect, though, is to keep in mind that one of the things we approved was the $500,000 for Comedian to try to take advantage of the pandemic situation, right? So you're talking 2.2 million, but a quarter of that, a little less than a quarter of that was one project that was specifically approved to try to get a better deal during the pandemic. I don't know if that's happened, but
So maybe it's better to say this. In addition, capital spending will bring the total capital spending to just under 2.2 million, which, while above our annual appropriation for July, we're meeting, the gap through these reasons, which we're comfortable with, given the larger than expected free cash.
okay. So I won't write it down now because I have it on recording. But is everybody fine with adding a statement that basically says that I won't say we're okay with it, quite that same language, but how about something like significantly more than appropriation in July. The Finance Committee is comfortable with the spending because of the large the large amount of free cash we had available for one-time expenses from FY20.
And because we originally cut back on the
Right, and because we reduced capital spending previously due to in the early stages of the pandemic. Is everybody fine with a kind of a statement like that? So
Yes.
I'll stick that in. So any other comments on the message? None? Okay, because if that's the case, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the warrant message with two amendments. One is to add what we just discussed,
Do we
and
want
the
to
other is to update the numbers based on.
Yeah, well, let's go through tonight and vote on this just at the end.
Okay,
Just
that's fine. I'm fine with both.
Just in case there are any material changes that.
Okay,
come
Okay.
tonight. Probably not, because I probably lose everything I want. But anyway,
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so if that's the case, we'll defer the vote on the warrant message till after we act on the remaining articles. So we'll start with, since we have the school.
Do we want to mention CARES at all? I mean, it's outside of town meeting, it's outside of appropriations.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to mention that in the message, no, because I mean,
Okay.
if I do mention it, I'll mention it at town meeting in the presentation. I'll make some mention of the fact that that we received this funding from the stimulus from the CARES Act that has been used to offset a lot of COVID expenses, because that did factor into some of our decision making, right? The reason we're bolstering the reserves again, and this is a conversation we're going to have with the schools here about what they might need if there's no federal stimulus for the second half of the school year. But
Right, because we don't know what's happening in January.
exactly, which we'll find out in a minute when we talk to them. So,
Okay.
okay, so let's move on. Let's start by talking to the school, since we have the school members here, so they don't have to hang out all night. So we want to talk to you guys about two things. Obviously, the capital request, and then the second thing is what I just mentioned, which is what expenses might look like in the absence of federal funding for the second half of the year. So I don't know, Anne Louise, are you going to cover this as the school committee member who's here?
Yeah, I'll give an overview, and then of course we have Dr. Kuska with us, as well as Keith Boudet, our business manager, and we're probably in a better position to answer any fine points on your questions. What do you want to start with, the capital request?
Yeah, whichever one you want. I'd say start with capital first, yeah.
Okay. So there's two components to the capital request, and one of those is something that we wouldn't typically ask for in the fall, Daniel. So that's a little bit why this may feel larger than normal. But we have included in our fall request the Chromebook purchase to replace the grade 6 and grade 9 Chromebooks. And ordinarily, we would submit that request in May. But as I think you're all aware, as a result of the pandemic and the incredible demand for technology and long lead times in purchasing and challenges with the supply chain on this front, we just barely received them in time to be able to prep them and deploy them this fall. So our technology team and Keith thought it would be prudent to submit the request now so that we could put in the order, as soon as we need to in the spring, which probably is going to be well before May when town meeting would occur again, just to be sure we have them on hand for next year. So typically this would have been part of our FY22 request. But it's because we're doing it in the fall, it falls under this one. And I think that's a wise decision because we just don't know. Yes, we're going to see a vaccine, we hope, in first quarter. We don't know what the distribution is going to look like and what's going to be impacted by it. So we're just trying to get ourselves ahead of the game.
it also won't be available for children for longer. They've just started testing.
Yeah, and I think that's probably right. But at the end of the day, our real problem is we just don't know how long we're going to be dealing with slow lead times in purchase and delivery of technology. So this is the standard tranche of replacement Chromebooks that we would pursue every year. 2 grades, grades 6 and 9. And the reason they're grades 6 and 9, because someone, I think it might have been Tina last night, brought this up at the select board meeting. She said, well, wasn't that on your spring request, grades 6 and 9? And yes, it was. But what happens is those are the first years entering into those buildings. And so those kids take those Chromebooks and travel onward. And so when the new crop of students come into the buildings, we bestow upon them a brand new Chromebook that they must care for a few years. So that's why it says grades 6 and 9. So it's, oh, here they are. My notes, if you want to know how many units it is exactly. It's 480 units for the 2 grades, and the total purchase order on that is about $112,000. So that's a Chromebook piece. The other piece is the $90,000 for the field house panels to address the peeling paint challenge that we have and improve the sound echoing in the gym, which is pretty significant. And there's also an added benefit of some incremental energy reduction because they insulate the gym. So, and it was that last piece that allowed for us to apply for a Green Communities grant. So we received $50,000 in a grant, but it doesn't cover the full scope of the project. There's still an additional, I think it was 40,000 in materials, or was that 50? You'll have to correct me, Keith. And in addition to that, there's a labor charge to actually get these things installed. And as I think some of you are aware, we had to make a decision. Do we pursue this project? Because if we can't get everything installed by January 15th, then we actually lose the grant. So we're trying to avoid that. We want to take advantage of the grant. Keith can talk to you at length about why we're choosing this route. I know several of you have been around long enough to know that the topic of peeling paint in the high school field house has been a long-standing concern of the community, of the select board. It's predominantly a cosmetic one, but it's enough of an issue that we have a responsibility to maintain the field house. The field house isn't going away, even if we choose to renovate or rebuild. If the SOI is approved by the state, it won't cover the field house. So we have an obligation to maintain that facility as best we can. And this solution was deemed to be the most effective solution in dealing with the paint problem, while also having some added benefit around sound insulation and energy preservation. So I don't know if you have any questions on that.
Mr. Alfred, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so since we haven't had a budget subcommittee meeting for some reason, just the facts. Is it then fair, and would you then sort of represent and promise that there will be no request for Chromebooks for fiscal year 2021, 2022?
Yeah, so this came up last night. I guess my response to that was, I certainly hope not, but I'm not going to, I never say never. I don't know if there might be some adjustment in that number, but if there was, I think it would be small. Occasionally there's an adjustment related to staff or what have you. These are the student Chromebooks. Our numbers are projected pretty tightly, but I don't anticipate it, but. I don't
mean one-off Chromebooks. I mean like whole class,
Right. In other words, this is replacing a request we would have seen in May. That's
correct.
So the anticipation is that we're not going to see a request like this for May.
That's correct.
Or the fall of next year, unless we're still backed up, I guess, in orders.
Oh, let's not get ahead of ourselves for next fall. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, but this is normally you do
that's a fair
2 grades
question,
of Chromebooks a year, So.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. No, and our goal. Once again, our goal in replacing 2 grades worth every single year is to manage the inventory so that we don't come to you with a financial tsunami saying, oh, looks like 6 grades have aged out and we need to replace, 1,000 Chromebooks. So this is the best way to sort of flatten that curve.
No, I get that, but we're sort of doing 4 years in 1 year in essence now. So
yeah,
just an acceleration, Dan. That's all. It's just accelerating it.
Right, but because we did Chromebooks in May, you got a whole bunch of replacements. That was with CARES money, but you did a whole bunch of Chromebooks in May, and so you shouldn't need to do them next year. And
we got a significant community donation, so I do want to acknowledge that. But I want to answer your question. Yes, you're correct. This is the May request. No, we're not going to come to you with another grade or 2 and throw it on to the request in May.
Right. Well, I think his point is that the way this worked prior to the pandemic was every May you came with the request for that year. So you got your May request this year through the CARES and through other things. You're asking for what is next May's request now. And so his point is that means that we shouldn't see another request till May of 2022.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right.
For grades 6 and 9.
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. No. No.
I think Ken's right.
No, Ken's right, but what is this for grade 6 and 9?
We're accelerating the grade 6 and 9 request. That's what we're doing.
Right, but you do 2 classes every year.
Right.
But you're not going to come asking for elementary school Chromebooks either.
That discussion has not happened yet.
So,
I mean, I'm not trying to be coy here. I just don't know. I can't predict the future in that way. I just know that this is.
I'm willing to
sixth-
support this tonight as long as I don't see another Chromebook request for.
So wait, Daniel. So let's just make sure we're all singing from the same sheet of music here. So the request we would ordinarily put in May would be to replace the grade 6 and grade 9. Now, our investment, first of all, I also want to point out, like, the town did sort of benefit from our ability to offload this request this prior May to CARES, as well as to some very generous community donations. So it really hasn't been a full double whammy for the town, okay? But that aside, this is the grade 6 and 9, and the strategy for our tech enablement has really been to we have a one-to-one environment, grade 6 to 9. Prior to the pandemic, it was almost 2 to 1 in Miller, okay? But because of the pandemic, we tried to go deeper, and we had to go deeper, okay? And that is where some of these incremental donations have come in, and we tried to enable students even at Placentino, as you know. Now, having said that, there's a larger strategic discussion about what does tech enablement look like for an elementary student. The pandemic forced us to put the cart before the horse, and we haven't, as a committee or as a district, stepped back to say, how do we feel about tech enablement for kindergartners and first graders, and what's the right device solution for that, if there is one, and what does that look like for third graders? Like, that strategic discussion from a pedagogy standpoint actually hasn't fully happened yet. It has been forced because of this situation. I think we've learned a lot, and I'm sure Dr. Kuska could talk to that. So that's why I think Keith is also saying, I don't know a little bit about that component. But the good news is, because of the pandemic, we've purchased a fair number of devices to get our elementary population enabled. But I'm not going to tell you we'll never come back to you with another request to round out that solution, to replace devices or what have you.
Right.
What we're asking for tonight is to accelerate the request that would have addressed our one-to-one environment in grades 6 to 9. And every year we come with a request to get the new Chromebooks for grades 6 and 9, and then those students ride through. So we're just trying to pull it up by 6 months.
Okay, two things because others have questions. One, just because we got discount from COVID doesn't necessarily mean you bank that money that we can then.
No, I get it. I just don't want the community to think it was like.
Two, I'll support this tonight. Not that, I mean, I'm one of 7, but I'm doing so with the understanding that don't, machinate any other needs for it. Let's wait till 2022 to do additional Chromebooks. If you decide to do a wholesale sort of, let's take some time. Let's look at this. Let's not do Chromebooks for another 2 town meetings. So that's what. So if it comes before us, and unless it's some sort of extraneous circumstances like another pandemic type of thing where it like just is totally unforeseen, let's just slow the roll. Until for a year. That's why I'll support it tonight. Now, that doesn't mean you're promising and that you have to hold by that, and that you could bring it back, and the committee could then support it, and I could vote no, and blah blah blah. But that's how that would be where I'm voting.
I will make you a promise on behalf of the committee and our administration that before we come back with an additional request as it relates to the elementary population, especially Placentino, we will provide you with some context on why we believe that enablement strategy is the right approach. Okay?
In a year and a half.
Yeah.
Okay, we get the point.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's move on. Okay, Mark, you had your hand up. I'll get to you, Michelle.
Michelle, did you have questions about that? I wanted to move on to the field house, so I didn't want to.
I had a question. I think Anne Louise answered it because it was about the flips. So you haven't done an analysis of the flips yet, right?
An analysis. We have experience to talk to, and I'm sure Dr. Kuska could talk to that. We've gotten a lot of robust data and experiential data on the use of the device, and we've learned a lot. So I don't think tonight's probably the time for that, but I promise you we'll come back to you with a summary of that if that's helpful.
Because because the younger children are in the classrooms, they're not hybrid. And they're using the flips in the classroom, right?
Right. Well, we have some students that are fully remote by choice that are using the computers at home every day, and then they are using it in the classroom as well. We're exhibiting a huge paradigm shift in education. Some of the changes we've had with technology just from COVID are changes that are long overdue, and that's why it's hard to say definitively where we'll be a year from now or 2 years from now, just because we've now got technology in teachers' hands and they're being forced, good and bad. I mean, it was not a good reason, but there's some positive coming out of it, that they're learning to use technology in a far more robust way, which then generates questions about how we should be using it best. And then with our younger ones, whether it's iPads versus Chromebooks and all of the above. So that's why it's a little early now to kind of define where we'll be.
Okay, because my question was mainly, is it like the Chromebooks where the Chromebooks are assigned to students and those move with them? Or are those in a classroom where they remain in the classroom so that they don't have to be replenished as new students enter?
This year, right now, they're being assigned to them because it could be any time. If we had to go remote, they have to have the ability to take them with them. I don't know. We haven't talked long-term what the plan would be for next year, depending on where we are.
Okay, so we'll have this discussion some other time.
Yeah, it's TBD, but those are good questions, Michelle, and I think it's stuff that, our teachers are looking at every single day. The amount of learning coming out of this has been extraordinary. So we'll have to see, what that insight tells us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now you can go ahead, Mark.
So moving on to the field house. I understand there's labor, et cetera, to install and everything like that. And what I'm curious about is the labor. Do you have quotes for that? I would assume yes, on some level, to get a number for budgeting purposes. But then on top of that, so you mentioned peeling paint. I'm well aware. I've been in the field house. I know what it looks like. Whenever I hear peeling paint, my mind instantly goes to lead paint. And if there's been any sort of anything having to do with that, or I just want to make sure that we're not going to get this surprise. We have to get another 50 grand because we have to abate this whatever craziness might be on the wall right now.
Which has happened recently, not with the schools, but in other areas.
Keith, why don't you talk to this and get the Sherwin-Williams exploration, et cetera, et cetera.
First off, there is no lead paint in the schools. I mean, just get that out there. That's part of the renovation project, where any place we may have had it was remediated. And that, again, goes back to 1998. So no building standards or code would allow us to put lead paint back in. So that's a done deal. The reason behind that, the reason that the lead paint is peeling is because the galvanized steel walls that sit up on top of the cinder blocks were not prepped properly. The primer they used was an inappropriate primer, and thus the paint, and actually you shouldn't even have to use a primer, but that the paint then didn't adhere to it. And for years, and I mean over a decade, we've been scraping and painting, and we're losing ground every year because the paint was peeling faster than we could put it on, basically, so we stopped. And then a local resident who's in the painting business, Tim Kenny, who's done some work for us, he said, "Hey, how about I get a guy in here?" And he was able to get contacts with Sherwin-Williams Corporate, and that two gentlemen came in from Sherwin-Williams and took a chunk of the paint, looked at it, touched a couple of things, and basically came up with I have 3 bad solutions for you. One is to sandblast it, which is a disaster indoors. One is to chemically peel it, which to do that in a school is one step from a no. And the third choice is to cover it. So since that point in time, Tim has been bringing in vendor after vendor to give ideas on covering it. Rigid surfaces, the plywood planks, everything. So this one vendor he brought in this idea. He says, we got this product. Let me just get back to you on it. It's these panels, these quilted insulative panels. Let me just, And so he sent me a copy of it, said it would take to do this. We calculated the space. He came up with a number of $80,000 to $90,000 for the materials, which again, looking at a number of websites is right on. And he said that if he were to bid on the job, he would bid in the $40,000 to $50,000 range for installing them. So again, so we knew we had this number there. Then Chris Mayo, as part of the Green Communities Act, Green Communities Grant, excuse me, asked me every year, so what projects might you have in the schools? So there was a chunk of money that we could apply for that was still left over. It was $50,000. And I said, well, what about this project? Because these panels have an R value and, you know, you never know. And he said, sure, I'll put them in, you know, and I'm not saying we didn't expect it to win, but we didn't really expect it to win. So, so they awarded us that based on these panels have an R13 value. And unfortunately, you know, they only had $50,000 to fund as part of it. So we have that 50, and if we're going to do this project, we need another 90. As Anne Louise was saying, the Green Communities Grant is a 2-year grant. But if you do get all your projects done by mid-January, you can apply for new money the second year. So that's why we're kind of under the gun time-wise. So that's the, I'll say long and short of it. It's more the long of it, but yes.
I guess as a follow-up to that, with the assuming town meeting, say we recommend town meeting, it says yes, is from that December 5th to the middle of January, is that going to be enough time to mobilize, get everything, have people come in and do that? I mean, is that?
I'm going to say yes, because it'd be a requirement of the no, it'd be a requirement of the bid for the job. So if they can't get it done by that time, we then wouldn't use any of the money. So it's no different than returning capital, which again we've done before. So that's
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for the school committee on those 2 requests? Okay, I don't see any hands, so we'll move on to part 2, which is the COVID-related stuff. Which just to give the very quick background, because I want to keep us moving here. I know that Tina's only got a few more minutes, and we got a lot of work to do. So. When back in the fall, back in July, we talked about the possible impact to the schools of additional monies necessary to deal with COVID in the schools and having the schools open. Obviously, we're sitting here right now in November without federal stimulus, with the end of the CARES Act coming up at the end of December. So I had talked to Anne Louise and had asked her to find out for us and work with the school department to let us know what monies, if there is no further federal funds coming from Washington for whatever reason, what is their projection for what it's going to take to get through the rest of the school year starting January 1 without the CARES money? So that's what Anne Louise can speak to that now, or Keith, I don't know which one you want to.
So, well, I'll just give you a really high level and then Keith can go into detail. So the bottom line is we really just wanted to help you understand the town's exposure, like what's it going to take to keep the doors open if we don't see any money anytime soon from a federal stimulus package, state, et cetera. And I'll give you the short answer on that. Keith has estimated it's about $682,000, which is the cost above our appropriation, essentially, that it's taken to get us to this point, well, through, December 31st, through the first half, which technically is really about January 20th. And that's net of what I would call sunk costs. So there are some costs that we had to invest in upfront, from purchasing sanitizing machines or what have you. He can, go through that. That we're not going to need to repurchase. Okay, so there's some things we had to do upfront just to make it possible to open the doors. And those investments hold and will take us through the end of the year. So net of those, we're looking at a sort of gross exposure of an incremental $682,000 for the second half of the school year. Now, if we were to benefit from roughly the same amount of CARES financing, FEMA financing, that number would drop down to about $118,000.
118, you said, right?
Yeah, that's correct, right, Keith?
I had it being just actually 119,895. So it's in just under 120,000.
Okay, so
I just want to make sure it wasn't 180, not 180.
No, yeah, it's under 120. How about that?
Okay.
And that's again if making assumptions on what would be FEMA eligible and that they still declare this as an emergency. I'd spoken with the fire chief, who I see is online. And again, taking 25% of all the numbers in the categories which have qualified so far. So
So you just extended what's going on right now in the schools past December 3rd.
Correct.
Okay,
If nothing changes, correct. And that's, again, just because the money may be available doesn't mean they're not going to change it and either add more things to it or take some things away from it.
And Ken, you had asked me, the 682 is a little bit more than that 600, whether I felt we needed to go more. And the short answer is no. We're comfortable with this number and the 600 that you were talking about.
Okay, and just for the rest of the committee, since I hadn't explained it to them, our mechanism, as we've discussed and we presented to the town in July, our mechanism for dealing with the lack of federal funding would be the reserve fund, right? That's really the only source we have to deal with these expenses. And so when Ann Louise mentioned to me that the number was around 682, I had said to her, right now our plan that, we've discussed with Travis and everything is we were looking at about 600,000 in the reserve fund. And I said, that's for the whole town for till May or till the end of the fiscal year, because we don't even know, can't guarantee we'll have a Maytown meeting, right? So I said, that's what the comment was in reference to, is I said, should we be looking to bolster the reserve fund further? That's a discussion the 6 of us will have later. But that's what that comment was in relation to when she was mentioning the 600,000 was the reserve fund. So.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions concerning those amounts? I can't decide whether Dan's screen is frozen or whether he's just thinking of how he wants to say something.
Oh, good.
Okay, because you were remarkably still, and I said, okay, go ahead, Mr. Whitaker.
Do you anticipate? I know the answer was no, but I guess it's a ridiculous question then. But
It's Jeopardy. If we give you the answer, you give us a question.
Do you anticipate that changing? Like, so for instance, I thought we were still short a series of teachers or a series of certain staff levels. I'm not positive about that, but I thought there was a level of staffing that was being fulfilled by volunteers currently. And if those were to actually become hired people, would that number change significantly?
We still have a few positions that are open, a couple of building subs at Miller. It varies from building to building. They have been able to fill some of them. We're not relying on volunteerism for most of that. We've had, I think we have maybe one volunteer now at the middle school, if still there. So we've kind of gone backwards on the volunteering as we've been able to fill those positions. If things change and we had to go, let's hope not, but into a remote platform, that might also change the needs because we hired additional staff because we're in person the majority of the time. So that's where it's like it's a rolling number because of those things, but we don't foresee it getting any higher for sure. But there is a little bit of savings potential from the positions that we didn't fill as early on. There's a little bit left over from that.
So to answer your question a little more specifically, Mark, the 682 is inclusive of those positions. And the reason that we felt the 600,000 reserve would cover us is because we may not be able to fill those positions. We're operating and trying to get by, but if we can't fill them, we can't fill them. So that's kind of where we're at.
But it's not teaching positions per se. It's more of those support roles.
Yeah.
Yes, and just for the record, right, if there were a change in circumstance to the schools where they went fully remote, the expense would be lower.
There would be some savings associated with a potential reduction in force at some level or some other expenses. For instance, last year we benefited from, savings on heating costs and gasoline for buses that weren't being used. But anything contractual are standard labor costs and, busing contract, et cetera, anything like that. We don't get to cash in on that and say we don't need to spend it. Those are contractual obligations.
Well, I guess what I was implying was before somebody asked the question, well, if you go remote, it's going to cost more. I was just pointing out that the 682 is, I wouldn't say a worst case because we don't know what's going to happen. But if schooling has to change because of the pandemic, it actually would be no higher than this under the current model.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, Michelle, you had a question? You're on mute, Michelle.
We have to decide on reserve fund today, right?
Yes, we'll talk about that later.
Okay. We don't have on our agenda to go into executive session, right?
No, we do not.
Is there anything we would want to discuss in executive session that would affect how much we put in reserve fund?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Could we? Okay.
So just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anybody have any other questions? I mean, on this for the schools, because as I said, I don't want to necessarily keep them here if we've got all the info we want from them. So anybody, last round, last chance before we let them all go? Okay. I guess you're good. Thank you very much. I know, Annalise, you've been tied up with family stuff. Thank you for taking the time to come see us tonight.
My pleasure. And I'm going to thank all of you. I just want to thank you all because I know every time we come back, it's more. And
I'm going to prove the Chromebooks again.
But I made you laugh. I appreciate your flexibility if should you choose to approve them. Okay, so thank you on that in advance.
Okay, thanks. You guys don't have to stick around if you don't want to.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Yep, good night. Okay, so we do have to get to the warrant, but I'll give Travis the opportunity to try to get back on track with the warrant. I just want to do that out of turn because they were here. So let's get any updates from Travis before we start going back on our agenda here. So go ahead, Travis. And you can save warrant-related stuff if it's something that'll factor into our discussion later. You can save that for later if you want to.
The warrant has dominated my life. I don't think I have anything non-warrant related in my brain at the moment.
Okay, so we'll just wait, and then you can tell us about what update us when we get to that one. Okay. So next is liaison updates, which you just heard from the schools. There, as Mr. Alfred pointed out, we haven't met with them recently. I don't believe there are any other liaison updates because nobody informed me that they had any. I'm seeing shaking heads, so we'll move on from that one. Let's go on to the pandemic because this will obviously factor into our discussions later. So, Chief Cassidy, let's see the shirt this week. There we go. The only one who ever wears a tie to our meetings. So, although Keith does, but yeah, we know his is a clip-on. No, just kidding. Go ahead, Chief.
Not much to report from a financial standpoint for the pandemic. We remain a yellow community, which is moderate risk. That's partly due to the fact that the metrics changed 2 weeks ago. If the metrics hadn't changed, we'd still be in the red. We still have active spread in the community. We need compliance to occur in order for us to really stem the tide in our community. But we're good in terms of our PPE supply. We're good in terms of our staffing, and it's just a case of we've got to ride this out, and hopefully people will do the right thing during the upcoming holidays and stick with just their household and not travel, and try to reduce the spread in our community.
So Chief, that's one thing I kind of had on my little notes for this week was, as we're discussing the budget stuff for a special town meeting, with what we're seeing going on around the country now, I know you've said we're good for PPE.
Yes.
But are we, if things countrywide continue to trend, how much longer before it becomes a problem for us? In other words, are you starting to see tightening of PPE supplies because the demand is higher in these other states? And
absolutely. No, there's definitely a supply chain issue again. Right now, the biggest challenge is gloves, and some are starting to see problems with gowns. But based on what I stocked up on back in the spring and early summer, we can not only ride this wave, but we've got stuff to last us a while.
Okay, good. Because my only concern was that we're going to be fine until we're not fine, and then one day they're going to come to us and say, okay, now we're running out, and it's going to be, we can't get PPE, or we have the,
Yeah, no, I monitor availability. I keep an eye on our vendors. There are certain vendors that let us know what our allocation is, and that's based on our previous 6-month purchasing history. And there are times where our salespeople will let us know, listen, if you don't take your 4 boxes of medium gloves now, you're probably not going to be able to get them. So, we'll get the extra 4 boxes of medium gloves at that point, even if we don't need them, because we realize 2 months from them, we may not be able to get any medium gloves. So we've stockpiled. We're making sure that we've got access to everything that's available to us. And these are all supplies that we're going to continue to use, even if there's not as big a surge as we're experiencing right now.
Okay. And the last question I had was with regards to the CARES money, right?
Yeah.
So my guess, and of course I don't know this, but with the CARES expiration, what's going to happen? In other words, I assume that right now, when you're getting these calls that say, "Hey, buy a couple of boxes while you have a chance, and we've got them for you," that money is primarily funding is coming from CARES, right? Is that the case? What we're using to pay for these things?
It depends. If it's something that I'm not going to be able to tie directly to COVID-related expenses, like the use of nitrile gloves in the pre-hospital setting has been our standard since the early 90s. So every box of gloves I can't blame on the pandemic.
Right.
We're still going to use gloves. Things like splash shields and full body gowns, that's more pandemic related. So if it's routine supplies, I'll charge it to my annual appropriation. If it's stuff that clearly is pandemic related, we're associating that with CARES. But we have to be careful with that because the Federal Emergency Management Agency updated their guidance that went into effect on September 15th, that they would really only let you do a 60-day stockpile. So they didn't want people to have 3 years worth of stuff and try and get federal reimbursement for it. So I can't, based on my run rate, I can't stockpile too much on the federal dollar.
Okay. The reason I was asking was just because of the expiration of the funds. I was thinking about, do we have to be prepared to have extra money available should CARES run out? But it sounds like it's not all coming from CARES. It's coming from some of the appropriation. So again, the question would become, should we be considering, if things keep going as they are, and you keep getting these requests and you're buying at the rate you're buying, are we going to need more money for you in the spring? That's the real question.
I also have a federal grant for PPE, which the period of performance runs until late next summer. So I've got a secondary or tertiary source of funding for personal protective equipment. So I would not anticipate coming back with any sort of a substantial ask in the spring. I can't rule it out completely, but based on what I'm seeing right now, I'm fairly comfortable with what we have and what we're projected to have.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, you had a question?
I do. Just in light of the CARES Act, I'm just looking at last week's schedule that Travis sent out to everybody, and I'm trying to put in back in my head of how much we're going to need for a reserve, or at least think about it. There's 2 items of material under COVID-19, one being cleaning and disinfecting of public buildings. Let's assume that we still need to do that, and right now we have 126,000. It's probably a question for both you and Travis. Is this something that we should plan on doing for the remainder of the year? If we say 126,000, that's going to match, and that's what we should kind of put in the back of our head for the reserve. Plus, we have planning and development. I guess what goes into that, and is that something we need to think about for reserve?
Great
money?
questions. So, cleaning and disinfecting of public buildings is a large category.
Okay.
That also is a 25-75% split. So, cleaning and disinfecting of public buildings is 25% would be charged to CARES, 75% would be charged to FEMA. And as Mr. Boudet indicated earlier, although the CARES funding expires December 30th, the FEMA Federal Disaster Declaration does not expire at the end of December. So as long as we are able to continue to charge things that are related to the disaster to a FEMA project, then we would only be responsible for 25% of the cleaning and sanitizing of public buildings. Some of the expenses that are in the cleaning and sanitizing of public buildings are the types of things that were mentioned earlier by the school folks that are one-time purchases, a purchase of a piece of cleaning equipment. For example, back in the spring, we borrowed the school department's Clorox Total 360 fogging machine, and we're using that at public safety buildings. It was fine as long as the schools were closed, but once they decided they were going to open, they needed their machine back. So I purchased a backpack electrostatic sprayer for the police department. So that was a one-time expense. That's not, going to be an ongoing expense. That's different from the extra cleanings that we're doing at municipal buildings right now. As part of the reopening of the municipal buildings, most municipal buildings in July, we're bringing in an outside vendor to do deep cleans and high-touch areas, high-touch areas on a regular basis, deep cleans on an as-needed basis for potential exposures. We're going to need to continue to be budgeting that sort of thing, but we're also taking steps to make ourselves more self-sufficient. And again, that would include some one-time purchases of some sanitizing equipment. I just took delivery today of an electrostatic sprayer that I'll be providing to the facilities manager so that as of December 31st, if we need to hit a high-touch area when we don't have CARES Act money to help pay for an outside vendor, we would be able to do that with in-house personnel. With regards to planning and development, that is an attachment A category from the Administration and Finance guidance for the CARES Act program in Massachusetts, and that is the category that covers technology. So those would probably not be expenses that we would need to be moving forward for December 31st and afterwards.
Also, I just noticed a large accelerated telework capacity. Was that a one-time thing too, or is that like our different fees we're paying on a monthly basis?
Well, it's some of both. So accelerated telework capacity includes all of the purchases that the technology director made back in the spring.
Yep.
Allowed employees to work remotely, including some department heads to work remotely. Some of those were one-time costs, whether it was additional laptops, whether it was power supplies for them to be able to take their voice over IP phone home with them so that they could answer their department phone from home. Others are ongoing expenses, and whether that's a license for a platform such as Zoom, or whether that's telework capacity for the Youth and Family Services departments. Some of those are monthly, some of those are annual.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Ziemer, you had your hand up?
So what are the expenses that are ongoing after January if there is no more CARES money?
So we would have to make a determination as a town as to whether or not we would continue using an outside vendor for those cleanings on a regular basis or a deep clean. When the vendor was brought in, it was clearly explained to them that this was a temporary opportunity and that there was no guarantee post December 30th. So they recognized the fact that they might just go back to the regular cleanings that they always did. Again, we will have the capacity to be able to do high touch areas for if we've got a concern that there's been someone who may have been a suspected case. We certainly can look at what needs to be ongoing and what we may have to forego. And again, a lot of that's going to depend on what the situation is with the spread of the virus in the community and the state.
But I mean, you still need supplies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But probably, again, we're building capacity right now to be able to continue on somewhat independently for a while. Yeah, we'll still need some supplies, but there will be some that will, equipment we will have purchased ahead of time.
Okay.
So go ahead, Travis.
I would just add to that and to Michelle's question, what will we continue from this first half of this year into the second half? Within Article 1, I think we discussed it a little bit last week. The IT support person, Justin, we're going to want to continue that. We think that, 12 Zooms a week, 12 Zoom meetings a week is probably our reality through the fiscal year. So within that Article 1 that we discussed last week, that is factored in there. The increase of $50,000 within that Article 1 also assumes for facilities, maintenance, right? That gives us some capacity there. And then, the issues that we've identified when it comes to unemployment and those that we also discussed previously, the idea behind that is sort of preparing us for the second half of this fiscal year.
Okay, but nothing that we'd have to think about when we were thinking about reserve fund. Like this, when we were discussing the schools, their expenses, nothing else town-wide.
No, I mean, I think that the way Article 1, the way that I was approaching it was to sort of think of the ones that we want to make sure we're factoring in for the second half of the year so that we're in good shape. While, the FinCom reserve would be then maintained, and Article 1 puts 40,000 back into it, recognizing what has already been appropriated or what has been approved through it, with the idea that the ones that we know we can address through Article 1 now, and the ones that we can't, we would want to make sure, the FinCom reserve is in good shape to do that. So that was the idea of putting the 40,000 back in Article 1 and addressing the big chunk ones, which is legal, unemployment, facilities, having that in there now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Chief Cassidy.
Thank you. And I think one of the benefits that we have is the quarterly reporting that Travis has been providing. Rather than being surprised by things in April or May, I think you'll have a much better picture even post-December, knowing where we are halfway through the year. And I think that will help with projections a lot better than some of the absence of information that we've had in prior years.
Right, which we certainly look forward to, but unfortunately we won't get that till January, and town meeting's on December 5th. So hence the reason for the questions tonight.
Yep.
Right. So, okay, any other questions on COVID response? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Chief. And let me go on to the next thing, which is budget. Well, 5 and 6 are the same thing, basically FY21 budgeting, which is part of the warrant. So I guess this starts our warrant discussion. And I'll start out by letting Travis give us any updates on the warrant. You've got some material today, and you can just review what you sent out. So go ahead, Travis.
Sure. So I think the way that we left it last week, obviously we were waiting on the school committee vote for Article 5. So you got the update from school committee. I also had a couple of changes, and Chief Cassidy can do his celebratory dance here, that the 30,000 was removed from Article 5, that is not going to be needed. We had that there in case, obviously the discussion that we had was we don't want to be bringing back things on previous requests, and that's not needed. So that's good news. Additionally, through the capital subcommittee, the conversations with Tim and Ken and Sue had asked that we pursue another vehicle for the facilities manager to see if we could get a better price. We did have to change the vehicle, but by using a statewide contract through a different vendor, MHQ, we found a vehicle that hits the specs, fits within green communities, and is a lower price at just over $20,000 rather than $25,000. So those are the main changes to Article 5, and I can get into that. But I resent all the sort of backup with a couple of changes to you today. I also told you I was going to come back to you for Article 7. I made a recommendation to the select board last night before they voted, and then I provided you backup on Article 15. So wherever you'd like to start, Chair, just let me know.
Okay, well, I was just looking while you were doing that. I was just reviewing to make sure I knew which articles we had deferred. We had deferred 5, 6, 7, and 15. It looks like. So let's start with 5, which is the capital.
Okay, and then, so you, just so I'm clear on your process, you don't take a vote on road acceptance, or you do?
We generally don't, because that doesn't have financial implications, right? Unless there are, like if you said we're accepting a road and it's, our stance on road acceptances is we don't take a position except when the road acceptance is noted to us as involving potential town. In other words, like our assumption is when a road acceptance comes before a town meeting, that it meets all the criteria, that all the people involved, DPW, everybody is okay with the road acceptance, that the road has been built to acceptable standards, and that we're not accepting a road that's going to be a financial liability other than plowing, right? And plowing maintenance. But so if that's not the case for this road acceptance, then we expect you to point that out and say, this is, but generally our prior conversations have been road acceptance won't even get to the warrant until the select board's done their job of making sure that all the various departments have signed off on it, so to speak. So.
Okay. All right. So then you want to start with Article 5.
Yeah, we're going to go back and we're going to talk about 1 at the end because we have to talk about our reserves. But let's talk about 5. Let's go through the ones we didn't talk about last week and make progress on those first. So.
Okay, so I would just let you ask any questions that you may have rather than going down the list, unless you'd like me to go down the list.
Well, hold on. I'm trying.
What's the total now for Article 5? Sorry, I'm looking at the old one.
It should be 1,255,316.
That's correct.
Travis sent out a whole list. It was one of his attachments.
If you look at what Travis sent today, that's got the current quote unquote final list.
Okay.
Okay, so in there is the facility manager vehicle. That's the reduction in price. The railings at $1,750, septic system, the air packs and bottles. We talked about most of these. The removal of the 30,000 additional for the interoperability, and then of course the 2 that we heard about tonight, the insulation and the Chromebooks. And note that the insulation was increased to include the labor. So it was I think 40 or 50,000 last week. Now it's 90,000. So.
Okay, so that's the delta there. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just open up for anybody who has questions on those. The one question I had was the equipped. I think I asked you this earlier, Travis. The equipped on the Silverado, is that plowable equipped?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So everything else I think we talked about last week. So I don't think there's anything more. Okay. So if everybody's okay with what's there in terms of recommendation, then I'll entertain a motion to recommend that the Finance Committee, the motion that says the Finance Committee recommends the following, that the town, actually, let me see how you have it. Okay. So which ones do you have coming from free cash, Travis?
Specifically the interior improvements to senior center and library. I think we had discussed that on a much earlier capital subcommittee call, maybe months ago at this point, that people would be more comfortable with those particular capital projects out of free cash rather than CapEx.
Okay.
Which
so those are the only 2?
Those are the only 2. So that adds up to 105 out of free cash, the rest out of CapEx.
Okay, so that would mean our motion would want to say that the Finance Committee recommends that the town appropriate the following sums from the Capital Expenditure Fund: $20,100 for a facilities manager's vehicle, $10,000 for steps and railings at 1750 Washington Street, $150,000 for a septic work at Town Hall, $370,000 for replacement air packs and bottles for the fire department, $25,500 for ambulance tone and voice pagers, $166,125 for the trackless mower with attachments for the highway department, or DPW highway, $55,000 for a Chevy Silverado fully equipped for the DPW highway department, $151,525 for 3 police vehicles. Let's see, $90,000 for insulation work at the high school field house, and $112,066 for Chromebooks for the schools, and also appropriate $65,000 from free cash for maintenance and improvements at the library, and $40,000 from free cash for improvements at the senior center.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on that motion? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Ms. Ziemer,
Yes.
Mr. Alfred,
Yep.
Mr. Whitaker,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, so we have a recommendation for Article 5. Okay, now let's go back to, next up on the list is Article 6. Now, Article 6, did you ever hear back from Frank? I didn't hear back from him at all.
I sent that email to you and him, and I did not get a response to it.
Okay, so that being said, I would say that our motion for that wants to be that we'll make a recommendation at town meeting. And then we'll try to get to talk to him before we get there.
Okay, the comment I have is that I think generally speaking, he does his comments at town meeting as well. So that's all I have. I know that, we just confirmed the way that they voted works with the finances on, our end. On the Sharon took a look at everything to make sure that, how the buckets.
They have the money they're saying they're spending. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Within those buckets. So we're all set on our end. So just let me know if you need anything.
Okay. So as I said, I would say, given that we haven't heard back from Frank, that we make a recommendation at town meeting.
So moved.
You're muted.
Sorry. Should we have a meeting, bring him in for a call before the meeting, the town meeting?
Yes, I will post us. I will put a nice neon sign in our new traffic signs that we get. We'll put a sign saying the FinCom is meeting before town meeting. And we will make sure that I'll try to get in touch with him between now and December 5th.
I can't buy those signs ahead of town meeting.
Well, we have the other two that are static, so we won't be able to give people their speed while we're telling them about the meeting. But okay. So does anybody want to make the motion that we make a recommendation at town meeting for Article 6?
I make a motion that we're going to make a recommendation at town meeting for Article 6.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion on that? Okay, I don't see any hands up, so we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor, Ms. Ziemer,
Aye.
Mr. Alfred.
Aye, though I'd prefer to have this before town meeting.
Yes, well, Mr. Whitaker,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Yes, I know. I'll talk to Frank about that because, see, remember we used to have, I explained this to Travis, we used to have the benefit of Frank having the Boy Scout troop meeting next door when we were at town hall. So that's why he could show up when he was there for scouts anyway. So we don't have that benefit with the virtual meeting. So, okay. So 7 was the next one. And this, we had the discussion last week about pre-using, so to speak, or pre-allocating Chapter 90 funds for next year. And so Travis and the select board adjusted this amount to eliminate the need for future Chapter 90 money. So that's why you see the change around there. But go ahead, Travis, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so that was my reasoning. I appreciate, obviously, the DPW coming in at the least amount that they felt like they could ask for, right? I get the reasoning behind that. My concern is the message that we received from Senator Spilka and Rep. Dykema and just in general. I think we're all aware we need to be preparing for 22. I just don't like the idea personally when we have the CapEx fund where it is to sort of be relying on 22 Chapter 90 funding when we have the ability to put this in right now and make sure that we get this done. And also, I think that, as I mentioned last time, the conversations that we've been having ongoing through the capital subcommittee to say, ask for the right amount so that we're not coming back again in the future. Both of those, and conversations with Sharon Emmerich when we looked at the financial components of this project to say, yes, theoretically it could be done with the 353 request, but, not factoring in $65,000 from future allocation makes more sense. And so the select board agreed last night and I amended it before the warrant is getting approved today. So it is 418, I want to say. And again, the impact of the bottom line of all of these, the way that the money was sort of set up through this warrant, is that it will reduce the amount that we're increasing the capital expenditure fund, right? So we're still planning on, through this sort of the mechanism that we have laid out here, putting enough money back into CapEx to cover the expenditures that we have laid out, even with an increase to this expenditure. Sorry, that was a little wordy, but that was my thinking, and I'd be happy to answer any question.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Travis on that?
No, I appreciate him going back because we don't want to be spending future money, and God forbid something happens and they can't get the Chapter 90 money out. We still need to get this done.
Yeah, although it would be kind of interesting to leave the road, leave it like 3/4 done and then say,
I still don't know why aren't we living within the Chapter 90 money and just doing this when we have the opportunity, next year when we have more Chapter 90 money. And yeah, it would mean we do less, but I mean.
But it also means that we won't be able to do something else, probably like my street or something. Let's be self-centered. So we have it. And
I did say I will tell you, for the interest of public disclosure, I did say to Travis, there's a lot of money going into Mudville now. It would be nice to see some projects outside of Mudville. I mean, only because they just got all the water main work was done there, and now they're doing all this stuff.
Thinking because Tina, now.
No, I'm not saying that. You said that, not me. But I'm just saying that we got to start focusing on something other than Mudville in this town.
I've noticed the same thing that certain turnover has created a certain emphasis on certain areas in town.
These were already planned. I do remember approving this at town meeting. So before Tina even got on the.
But in all seriousness, why aren't we living sort of more within our Chapter 90 means? I mean, I don't totally understand.
Well, this was more than Chapter 90. This was renovation of the whole entire pipes and water and sidewalks and everything. So.
Well, the water main was paid for out of the infrastructure fee, all that work.
Yeah. Well, it's all related. So
so a lot of what we're looking at here, right, is piecing together to finish this project. So the project, again, I think I mentioned last week was a priority for the highway department that did not go ahead with the idea that the water mains needed to be done first. So the water main project was approved. There is still money within that previous warrant article balance that was meant for finishing the roadways. So that is part of what we have available. Then there's the Chapter 90 funding, some capital funding within the highway department. And this is really the delta to finish the project and move on. As Vin mentioned, right, focusing on other areas. The idea here would be, let's get this Mudville project done, and then highway is sort of out of that area, focusing on others. And by not tying up FY22 Chapter 90 funds, that's going to allow them to go, further in other areas of town.
Let me ask you a question. This isn't exactly fair to ask you because you're not the ultimate decider of this question. But if free cash had come in $1 million less, right? What would be different about what we're doing now? Obviously, we wouldn't be able to reduce the increase in the tax rate like we're doing. So that's half of it. So now we're $500,000 less. The point is, it feels to me like we're spending a lot of money in this, and it may not be this article, but it feels like we're spending a ton of money because we have it. And I'm just not entirely sure that to me is these are projects that need to be done at sort of some point, I guess. But it feels like we're sort of rushing to spend it on projects that may not necessarily, given the economic environment that we're in, maybe aren't necessarily the projects that we shouldn't necessarily be doing. And it may not be this article, but maybe we cut back. Would it have been CapEx that we cut back on?
No, what it would have been? What it would have been is the water treatment plant. That's what it would have been. We would have increased the borrowing authority instead of putting money towards it. That I can almost guarantee you.
The water treatment plant probably would have been a borrowing authority, and then sort of dealing with that when we came up, right? So that's a significant chunk as well. What we're also doing with the way that this is set up and the discussions that we had last week more than right now is, and I think Vin brought it up, that the 484 coming from overlay that we have designed to go to stabilization, in addition to putting $400,000 back that had been used in July, is actually increasing that balance. Again, that goes to the conversation that we had with Spilka and Dykema about, let's get ready for 22. And so, we probably would not have been able to do that. We probably would not be looking at any increase to the balance of the CapEx fund. And then obviously, as Ken mentioned, the way that we're handling the water treatment plant discussion would be very different.
Are there any things that we have not seen on this warrant because they didn't come to us because they weren't approved by the select board, that are needs in town that have been that these have been prioritized over?
So, I mean, in terms of the studies, obviously,
I'm talking, I guess, in terms of the infrastructure and things like that.
yeah. So I think that the sidewalk, and in terms of the studies that had previously come before, right, I think it was evident that the priority was the sidewalk and the water over the DPW facility study, right? And so that one is sort of on the back burner. I don't think anybody, sees those two structures in town as the future facilities 10 years from now. So I think everybody understands that there is going to be that need, but the priority really is addressing the other studies that are going to allow us to plan our capital. So that would be my prime example for your question. But
are there other areas in town that have infrastructure road needs or things like this road? I didn't realize this has already come before that. I apologize for that, but that maybe that these items have been prioritized over.
I think that what you're asking is, was there anything that wasn't asked for?
or what isn't being asked for from us, I guess, because I haven't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, was there anything?
Right. So, yeah, I think, the conversations as we had sort of with the capital subcommittee, I would say, as I'm looking at it, and I tried to make this point previously, and I guess at some point it becomes show everything all together and then show it whittled down. But with 2 vehicles for the DPW right here, that is a substantial decrease from what a fleet schedule would sort of call for. The idea is we're looking at what we absolutely need to do, and then picking essentially the 2 priority items within the DPW fleet list, right? And so two vehicles or 2 pieces of machinery, quite frankly, from DPW being on the capital list, in my opinion, is substantially whittled down. I think, with the conversations that I had before sort of bringing that to the capital subcommittee, right, with the air packs and bottles, I know we had a conversation with last week with this group, that's a sizable amount. We were hoping for a grant to offset it, but during that conversation, it was to Chief Cassidy, right? If we're going to put $370,000 potentially on the capital, we're going to have to potentially move some other things that you would have lined up in FY21. And I believe the Cascade system and some other things that are on the 5-year plan got, these are ones that can wait because it's the priority to have the 370. So yes, there's certainly a lot of prioritization that happened. And, I think if I bring all of that information in a different way, maybe that would be, sort of to show what has been removed, that would be better.
I would like to see some more of that. Not to say, hey, you left this off, but I'd like to be included or anything like that. That's not really, our role. But it, there are a few things that were struck off here, but it has always felt to me, and it sort of feels again this year that things are just sort of waved through. And luckily this year we kind of have the money to do this one time. We've won a lot of one-time money with which they were able to do it, but that that there's not always a lot of sort of no saying that happens before it gets to the final.
Right. And that's criticism of all select boards we've had over the years.
So, and this is not a criticism of you, Travis. It's not really your role is to. You obviously are helping with it, but ultimately, you're not the vote that puts it on the warrant. So.
Okay, so I've got multiple hands up. We'll give Tina. She wants to chime in. So go ahead, Tina.
Thank you, Ken. This is Tina. I just want to point out that the comment about why is the town spending outside of our Chapter 90 money, I think just a little bit looking back into history will help figure out why that is. Our Chapter 90 apportionment has not increased since before 2014. In fact, it's actually less than 6-7 years ago in 2014, that time frame. So we haven't seen more than $510,000 in Chapter 90 money in over 5 years. So I can't speak for Sean Reese here, but my guess is the costs just go up and up and up over time, and we are not keeping pace with Chapter 90 funding from the state. This is a state issue. This is not a Holliston issue. And then in terms of any suggestion or innuendo that I advocate for my own personal interests through my service on the select board, I think you can go directly to Sean Reese to ask him that question, and he will categorically deny the fact that I've ever put a project that affects my home or my neighborhood ahead of any other. So I just want to be clear on that. Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
I would just say that just because we haven't gotten more money from Chapter 90 doesn't necessarily mean that the town should start spending on it. We should be advocating and pressing for more of it, but point taken.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Murphy, I think you were next then, Mr. Maxwell.
Yeah, I just want to counter Dan in the sense that for capital items, we have the money. I'm of the opinion we need all these items. It's not like we're doing willy-nilly. Probably the only thing that's brand new is the facilities manager vehicle, but we hired a facilities manager and he needs to get around. So it's either going to give him a car or we're going to reimburse him for mileage. So I think
counterpoint. We've got a ton of studies that we're also doing that are going to require a lot more capital spending in the future.
Okay.
So I'm just saying, you know, it's.
But I have the floor. So Dan, I'm talking about capital. And so all these things and the studies, I would go to the same logic, is that these are things that we've been talking about for the last couple of years. It was put up and we said we wanted more information. We do have the money. If we didn't have the money for free cash, we probably wouldn't be doing several of the studies, if not all of them, but we do have it. So I would say, why are we making an issue right now? We do have the money. We should be using it. We're also returning monies back to the residents. I put that in quotes because what's going to happen is, as you know, it's just going to go into retainage, or not retainage, but you're going to go into escrow, and maybe they'll lower the funds or the amount that I have to write my check for, but the money's still going to be coming out, and it's not like I'm going to get a check from the town. So I appreciate it, but I don't think putting up the fact that, oh, well, we're in a dire need, this recession. Well, we're not really in a recession, so we should be going and spending the money on things we need to spend. We're in a better shape than a lot of towns. We're not going out and adding staff like crazy. We're only adding one person, and that's through the fact that our technology director is going crazy trying to handle all these Zoom meetings. So we said, sure, that makes perfect sense.
And that's an intermittent employee, just to be clear.
First of all, we still are in a recession, but my point was about the studies was that the studies are for future capital spending in the future. So we're, you know, if you spend $500,000 now, you have $500,000 less for whatever comes from those studies. That's my point. Is it's not like there's, you know, this endless stream of money. Anyway, we can move on from that. We don't need to get into an argument about it, but that's okay.
Okay, you done, Mr. Murphy?
I'm done.
Okay, now we'll just get a second, Travis. Sure. Tim, do you want to? Are you good?
I do agree with Mr. Murphy. There is a lot of needs in town that we have pushed off over time. And in the last months, as I've been joining in with like the TAC committee, this is a group of individuals, including people within the community, having those conversations. And it's not just a random wish list of stuff that they want. And to, I think one of the direct points of things that we've cut, we did cut out a boiler at the police station, and we did cut out $90,000 for traffic cameras in the middle of town. So, you know, there's a number of committees that are having those conversations. It's more complex than what's happening here in our finance committee meeting.
No, I understand it. I wasn't, you know, mean to impugn you. I just was, anyway.
Okay, Travis, did you still want to chime in?
No, I was just going to say, you know, if people sort of agree with, you know, I'm also, you know, obviously this is my first warrant going through here, and, you know, just feedback on the logic behind the Chapter 90, not focusing on 22. I just wanted to make sure I made my point clear, and if people had further questions or agree or disagree with that sort of going forward, it would just be good to know.
Okay.
I was just wondering, could someone explain to me Chapter 90 money? What is it based on? If it has been the same for all these years, was it based on something in the past and now it just stays level?
I'm guessing it's a gas tax, correct? And since everybody has all the more efficient cars and people have the electric cars or, you know, hybrid cars, there's less money to be spent. is how I believe, because it's supposed to be earmarked for bridges and roads, the gas tax.
Yeah, it's a bond bill they do every year, and they just, so they bond out a certain amount and then they distribute that money to cities and towns.
Right, but what is it based on, like our population, our miles of road?
I don't know exactly what they base it on.
So we have to apply each year based on specific projects and all that. And that it used to be you would fill out all of these forms. You would make your case for the projects that you were going to do and all those things. And as Vin and Ken have sort of alluded, that process has changed over time, and now it's just become a pretty standard. It's sort of almost, we wait to hear it how it's battled out at the state. There have been impacts on why they haven't been able to sort of increase Chapter 90 allotments, and gas tax plays into that. It looks like Tina put in a message here that Chapter 90 is based on miles, populations, and employment. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things that sort of stagnated. It used to be, we would put together communities, not, all communities would put together their list and go through this and fight for funding of specific projects. And now it's just very, formulaic and stagnant.
Thank you.
Yes, and if you remember Mr. Shea, when he was on the finance committee, right? Could go ask him. He's the guy. I assume he's still working at DOT. Could go lobby him and tell him to get our, although he was only accounting or something there, but we can go bug him and say, use your connections, get us more money. Okay. Any other questions about that? So we were discussing the Article 7, which was the sidewalk, the 418,000. So does somebody want to make a motion? I mean, it sounds like we're going to go with
I want to make a motion to approve that.
Okay, so the motion would be appropriate 418,000 from the capital expenditure fund for the purpose stated.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Ms. Zemer?
Aye.
Mr. Alfred?
Present.
Is that an abstain?
Sure.
Okay.
Present. I don't know.
That's an abstain, just confirming. Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. So we will have a recommendation for Article 7. And let me, too many windows here to go back and forth to. So we have, so let's see, 5, 6, 7, and then we had 15. Okay. And 15 was the, that was the TAC thing, the engineering studies, right? And there were some questions about that. So I'll give Travis the opportunity to explain anything he wants to explain about 15.
Sure. So this is the one we had some discussion last time, and this was actually not a TAC request. This is for the select board based on the feedback from sort of both areas related to industrial parks, has really been the main push for this one. I think the conversation last week was sort of, are we just sort of trying to put a pot of money aside to do things as they come up? And I just wanted to make sure that I got you the info that I was working off of and the assumptions that I was using. And so I put that together in the email that you have today, just to sort of show the background on the projects that have been prioritized so far. And then also how I'm coming to the cost estimate. And I have talked to a firm that does the noise ordinance assessment. This is something that has been on my radar since I came to town through the former building inspector on issues related and not related to traffic. The traffic engineering study is something that's sort of on my radar as I'm working through the Mass DOT process on heavy commercial vehicle exclusions. We're currently pursuing one for Woodland Street, and we had counts on that street. And the way I've had the opportunity to work very closely with Mass DOT for quite a while now on some of these, and essentially the data that you need to provide to have conversations with Mass DOT, even if you're making decisions on your own roadways, is you need to provide them with quite a bit of data. And where, I think we as a community can benefit from the other article where we're looking to collect our own data to make real-time decisions through the police department and TAC. This is one to sort of say, if we're going to convince Mass DOT to allow us to change anything about our roadways, we need to be providing them with engineer stamped counts on our roadways. And so within this, I would estimate to provide the full service, a full service engagement with a traffic engineer that gives you the data collection, the technical memo with the engineering stamp, and potentially regulatory and site plan review that would go through the planning board, and potentially sometimes expert testimony, which is necessary. I would estimate a per engagement cost about $6,600. For a sound engineering study, it really depends on the use that you're going for, but for a noise ordinance assessment related to 310 CMR 7.10, which is what we sort of rely on when it comes to noise above ambient, there's a few different things that would go into this, but those can range from $3,000 to $5,000. So that's the basis. The list that I was what I was going to bring back to the committee after our discussion last week was where specifically these would be focused. And I'll just let you know the priority at the moment is South Street, regardless of developments or potential developments at the Hopping Brook Industrial Park. South Street has been a longstanding issue in town when it comes to heavy commercial vehicle on a street that is really not built for it. We have quite a few issues there, and we do have the potential, depending on where development goes within Hopping Brook, to be pursuing some traffic studies as related to Route 16, because through the MEPA process, that development may require a light at Hopping Brook and 16, and we can ask through the planning board to sort of make sure that other quality of life issues are potentially addressed through studies paid for by the developer. But when it comes to South Street, which has been a longstanding issue, and it would be an issue with or without development in Hopping Brook, we would want to potentially pursue a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion there. When you do that, you also need to have another community. If you are impacting another community, that would be the alternate route. You need to have them on board. We have engaged Medway, who would also be interested because they don't want heavy commercial vehicles when South Street becomes Clark Street. So anyway, just to sort of follow up on last week's conversation, that's priority number one. We are obviously already pursuing Woodland, but there are other areas within the Lowland Industrial Park that we need to be looking at. So that is on here. And then we also have potential impacts that we want to be talking about. Speed, when you want to be impacting speed potentially in the downtown area, if that is an eventual discussion we want to have in Mass DOT, that would require study. And then just lastly that I have on the list is the idea of simply the sound engineering, and what that would be could be a number of different things. One, a number of the concerns that we've had have been related to jake braking. That is something that you essentially need to prove out. Even in that instance, we cannot, Mass DOT will not give us no jake braking signs on the parts of 16 that they own. There are no jake braking signs on the parts of 16 that we own, and there are none that I'm aware of in sort of the residential areas. Additionally, there are also some needs within the industrial park areas where people have complained that sound is above ambient, is breaking the CMR, and the only way that we would be able to pursue that through the building inspector, the building department, would be a sound engineer. So these are the sort of things that have led to this, and I'd be happy to talk about any of them or sort of the thinking behind it.
Okay, well, let me see. I don't see any hands up, but I do have a question. Since I live near one of these areas, one of the questions I had is, you said low industrial park areas, Bullard, Fisk, and Central. I mean, there are 5 areas there, right? But I'm saying the one that's priority 2. I'm just curious as to Bullard, like Fisk and Central, like Lowland Industrial Park doesn't intersect Fisk, doesn't intersect Central or Bullard, right? So is that just residual, the impact of looking at what happens if you divert there, or is that just, that's why I was just curious about that. I mean, obviously I'm not against it. It's, but I'm just wondering why like Bullard and Central when they're not directly connected to Lowland.
Yeah, so part of the issues that we've had is some of the streets that came up in the Lowland forum or elsewhere by emails or contact directly to my office simply they're just not going to be worth our effort to pursue heavy commercial vehicle exclusions for a number of reasons. Some of them that have complained about heavy commercial vehicles don't even access directly to any main route that'll get you to 16. It seems to be error. So I think, we can address that through signage. So Bullard seems to be one where we do have GPS bringing trucks onto it. And one of the things that we'd have to look at is sort of impacts if we were to remove Bullard. On that side, I'm trying to think one as well, where we're looking at also things that are happening in that area that is not in our control. So Sherburne, looking at Western Ave is one that we want to make sure that we're ready to address if they were to do anything with Western Ave, how that would impact our community. And all of this is, in some regard, going to be, as we're all aware, if we're moving trucks off of one street, they're gonna end up on other streets, and we need to be prepared for that. That's why we want to be able to collect the data that we talked about through the TAC request, but we also need to be able to address them with Mass DOT. So that's why I wrote that there next to Bullard, but Bullard was the one that I think we do want to address within Lowland next.
Okay. Any other questions on this one? Okay, if everybody's fine with this was the, go back to that window. This was the $40,000 from free cash for this traffic engineering sound studies.
I make a recommendation, the FinCom makes a favorable recommendation for $40,000 from free cash.
We recommend that the town appropriate $40,000 from free cash for the purpose stated in the article. That what you want to say?
So moved. That's exactly what I was thinking, Ken.
Okay, good. Okay, do I have a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Did we lose Tim?
No, he's here. He's just
okay.
Okay, any further debate on that? Okay, let's proceed to a vote. Ms. Ziemer.
Aye.
Mr. Alfred.
Aye.
Mr. Murphy.
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, that carries. So now we have recommendations for everything. Okay, so now that we have a recommendation for everything in the warrant that we need to make a recommendation for, let's talk about the reserve fund, because that will ultimately impact other recommendations we've made if we decide to do anything there. Okay, so this is basically Article 1. So if you're following, in your little thing at Travis, and let's look at Article 1. With the actions we have in Article 1, we would be bringing the reserve fund up to up to 600,000 back to where we started, because we spent about 40. I think we actually spent 50, right? So we have 590 in the reserve fund, going forward. You heard from the schools that they said that there's upwards of 682 that they might need. Again, we don't have to change anything, but I know that that's something that we want to discuss, which is, do we want to consider making adjustments to, what do people think is the right level of reserve based on what we've heard so far? Mr. Murphy, you can start out.
I was thinking 600 plus another 200. So up to 800,000, because if they're saying 680, they're probably overshooting, but at the same time, they probably will need monies, and we don't want to be caught in a bad position come the end of the year or whenever they start using the money, which they probably will be sooner than later. And we have other parts of the town that probably will need additional expenses that we haven't predicted at this point. So I was thinking 800,000.
I'm always worried about the Board of Health. Because they used a grant, now they're using CARES money to do the contact tracing. If there is no CARES money and they still have to do the contact tracing, if it's spiking, I don't know how much money that is, and that's just, I want to make sure that there's money for that. I don't know how much money, but I just want to make sure there's money for that.
Okay.
Chief Cassidy might have a better idea.
Of what he thinks well, he said, right, from his perspective, he doesn't need any additional money, but as far as Board of Health,
Right.
I don't know if he,
I don't know if he wants to chime in there.
Okay, so anybody else have opinions?
I'm actually,
You're good. Good, Travis.
No, it's all right if Dan's got a point.
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, I'm actually comfortable, I think, with what we're doing now. I think that, if we get into, really bad situation, we'll have May to cure it, which has hopefully, budgets aren't overspent that much.
Okay, let's be clear about what the purpose of this money would be for, right? It's not. See, I'm kind of mulling over where I think of the right number, whether 600 is the right number or not. But just to be clear, right? We've got to put ourselves in a position where we believe we have the finances covered through the remainder of the fiscal year. Now, obviously, we're all hoping and we're all planning that the government will do something at some point, the federal government, right? And that there will be some kind of stimulus or some kind of aid to states again, that maybe CARES Act gets continued, whatever. But in the absence of that, okay, are we prepared to make it through the rest of the year, the fiscal year? And that's I think is important. Go ahead, Travis, you wanted to add a comment?
My point was that we could make it to May and use stabilization if we needed to fill the holes that we didn't.
Except that this is now the second town meeting that hasn't happened on time. And my concern is we get screwed just like we did in FY20, where May goes to July and then the fiscal year closes and we're screwed.
Yeah, so my only thought was certainly behind Article 1, the idea is we've sort of addressed the need for the Finance Committee reserve to be focused in any significant way on the town side, freeing up the, you to be there on the school side, depending on things that we cannot currently predict. I guess one of the things I did not fully gather, and Chief Cassidy's hand is up, so maybe he'll address it, is the 682 number versus the 120 number that the schools were talking about. I think at this point, the big ticket items, the ones that would be issues for us, we're addressing through Article 1, getting the number back into the $600,000 range seems sufficient and like solid protection with the way Article 1 also helps us get to the end of the fiscal year, would be my opinion. But maybe Chief Cassidy has something on school spending that I didn't catch.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Thank you. No, I would not weigh in on school spending. I would defer to the business manager on that. But with regards to Michelle's question, in our current spreadsheet, I do have one charge of $770.50 for Salmon Home Care LLC for communicable disease investigation. And so I believe that was 1 month charge. So that's 770.50. If you want to project out 6 months of disease investigation, that's a good foundation.
Okay. So $5,000, under $5,000. Okay, Mr. Whitaker, you wanted to say something?
Well, I'm curious, and this is something you would know much better than I, but so we don't have the bad, maybe it's a bad assumption, but if we don't have the town meeting in May, it gets pushed off to July again. What have we lost out between May and July? And then conversely, if we were to say, do something crazy and say, okay, let's put, no tax refund for anybody and all that money goes right into the reserve fund, would that then be allocatable then at that point in time to go back to everybody? Or, I mean, I'm just kind of curious how.
So here's the simple answer, okay? Almost everything concerning finance requires a town meeting. There are very few things that don't, okay? Because town meeting is the appropriating authority in town. So when we make recommendations, the town meeting ultimately controls what happens. So when there is no town meeting, there's certain actions that are triggered by the close of the fiscal year, okay? Right, the books close essentially on an annual basis and the year is closed out. When town meeting this year pushed into July, that meant that the fiscal year closed before we got to town meeting. So that meant that whatever we had approved at the previous October was it. We had very limited ability to do anything. And when the pandemic hit, you know, there were other, exclusive of things like CARES and stuff that came as help from the federal government. From a municipal finance standpoint, our hands were largely tied because the only mechanism we have to deal with unexpected and unforeseen changes is the reserve fund. Okay. So in this particular case, right, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if you envision a scenario where we get no further federal aid whatsoever, and we put 600 in the reserve fund, and the schools need to stay open, or that they go hybrid, they stay the way they are the rest of the year, and they say we need 682,000, the only mechanism by which we can close that gap is to spend all of our reserves, right, all of the reserve fund, and look for other ways. We do get the ability to make line item transfers and things like that within the appropriation, but we can't appropriate further money. So we'd have to find 82,000 somewhere else, right? Which maybe we have it. Maybe we have excess in benefits or something, and we do it that way. So there are mechanisms that we have to deal with it. The issue is that you're limited by whatever capacity that is, right? Once you appropriate a budget, that department, that entity has the authority to spend up to their limit, right? So in theory, if we had a $600,000 reserve fund and every budget that we passed spent to its limit, which we don't think will happen, but let's say that happened, then we'd only have the 600,000 to deal with, right? So there are two ways of looking at it, right? We could assume that we have to get together, that we will have a town meeting in May, and we say, okay, we write it with 600, that'll get us to May, maybe early May, and if we get the town meeting and further adjustment is needed, we can make adjustment then, okay? But the other way of looking at it is to say, okay, which is what we did in July, by the way. We put in place a budget blueprint that said, hey, we want to do something so that, you know, if something happens and we can't hold October town meeting, that the budgets are set for the year, and they're set in a way that we don't have to rely on something to happen, that if it doesn't happen, you know, throws our budget plan out of whack. If we were to put more money in reserves now, and we did have a town meeting in May, there are two things we could do. One is we could take them out. We could reallocate them in May if we had a May town meeting. If we didn't have a May town meeting and we put money in here and we didn't use it, right? Let's say federal stimulus does come through and we have this big reserve, that money ends up going to free cash next year, right? It's not like the money gets spent just because we appropriate it. And just to be clear, and probably more for the people at home who are listening than for you, but the reserve fund is not a you spend it as you wish fund, right? There are statutory guidelines, unexpected, unanticipated expenses. Generally speaking, the attitude has been that anything COVID related, given the evolving nature of the crisis, is considered unexpected, because we may sit here right now and say, okay, we might have these, but nobody knows. Nobody knows if the COVID's going to go away in a month, or it's going to be a vaccine, or it's going to get 10 times worse. So generally speaking, the state has looked at that as acceptable, you know, in the short term at least, has looked at that as acceptable use of reserves, because nobody knows how the pandemic, you can't really plan for the pandemic that well, right? So it's not like if we bolstered our reserves, we just sit there at the end of the year and say, hey, let's go buy, you know, donuts for everybody, because we can't do that, right? Our hands are tied as to what we can use it for. So anyway, just to summarize, if you don't put enough money in and you have a town meeting, you're fine. If you don't put enough money in and you don't have a town meeting, then you've got to find the money elsewhere if you need it, right? If you put more money in than you need and you have a town meeting, then you're fine. Anytime you have a town meeting in May, you can fix things, right? If you put too much money in and you don't have a May town meeting, then that money that's left just goes to free cash if you don't end up using it for what you intended. So the money's not lost, it just gets tied up for the remainder of the year. And by the way, it would become eligible for line item transfer at the, you know, in May as well, when the Finance Committee had our powers to do that. So
yeah, it's kind of a follow-up, and maybe this is, Dan, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, but why wouldn't we just put it up to $700,000 or $800,000 just to cover our backsides in the event that we don't, you know, and I guess I don't see it.
That's exactly, you're right. The only reason you generally wouldn't do that is because you don't have the money to do that, right? But that's, you know.
I looked and
right.
And I would be amenable to doing that and thinking maybe we take it from some of the legal services money that we're bolstering and the unemployment insurance.
Yeah, that's exactly what my thinking was if we decide we want to bolster reserves, the reserve fund, we can move some of it from unemployment there. And then if unemployment, you know, again, we have the ability to do line item transfers, which I guess could go either way, except that it's just how we decide to present it to the town, right? But go ahead, Travis.
So that was going to be my question based on Mark's question was, you know, where the 200,000 is coming from. I guess to me, just so I'm understanding, the increase in 250 to unemployment, right? Let's say they fix the fraudulent issue. We have no unemployment issue in the second half of the year based on the way that we had budgeted, right? That is then available for the finance committee, specifically the finance committee, to approve a transfer between budgets. So the money goes in now through the town meeting into the unemployment budget. Let's say we don't need it. You see a shortfall somewhere else. You, as the finance committee, has the authority to line item transfer that where else you see it needed.
After May 1st, yeah.
This gives us the ability to, if we need to, put it back into unemployment if we need to earlier, or use it somewhere else earlier.
So it would be available December 5th in the way that it's currently situated in Article 1. By you saying to move it to FinCom instead, I'm just not seeing the benefit.
Don't say move it to the FinCom. We're not trying to take it into the FinCom. We're trying to put it into the
right. I was going to say, just, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I call it the FinCom reserve. You're right. You call it the reserve here, not the FinCom reserve. Either way. I guess I don't see the benefit to that in the mechanism, right? Either way, the thought process that I explained last week when I put it in unemployment, right, in that the thinking being it is in the budget. If it's not needed there, it either can be used as a budget transfer somewhere else or would flow to free cash. I'm just not seeing the benefit to have it in the reserve instead. I might be missing something.
Right. Well, the simple answer to that is the transfer can only occur after May 1. We don't have the ability to do line item transfers without town meeting approval prior to May 1. So if you put it in the reserve fund and unemployment comes in, then we have the ability to spend from the reserve fund to unemployment to say we have an unexpected bill for unemployment that has to be paid, right? So the difference between putting it in unemployment and putting it in the reserve is that the reserve allows us to cover the unemployment, but also cover the schools earlier if we need to. Otherwise, we have to wait till May 1st before we could take it back from unemployment to use for something else.
Right. Okay.
To be clear, I don't want to do the whole thing. I want to do 100.
Oh, I don't either. But
I just want to do 150, and I want to take 50 from the legal and 100 from unemployment.
Or just do 150 and just take it from unemployment, say 750, and leave our reserves at 750. You know, that's another option.
I think that the unemployment, the legal is probably higher than we needed to necessarily to be too. So, go ahead.
So not according to Travis, but that. Okay, Mr. Murphy, you had your hand up. Just.
Yeah, can Travis remind us why we have the unemployment, the legal so high into that Article 1? What was the reasoning? There was a logic
I'm
behind it.
I'm looking at litigation. No, I think the way I described it last week, I think the way you're talking about it, you know, splitting it between unemployment and legal, I think we definitely need more money in legal for litigation. Specifically, the 110 again was the same thing, which is if it's not needed, we're protecting ourselves in the second half of the year. If it's not needed, it's available for a line item transfer from the finance committee at the end of the year, or would flow to free cash if it was simply not needed. I am looking at potential litigation, and you know we could probably have that conversation in executive session. But that is specifically the legal budget will need assistance, and I'd prefer not to wait and rely on the finance, on the reserve transfer because. You know, we're aware of it now, so preparing for it. The same way with the unemployment, which is if it is not an issue, it's simply putting us in good position to finish out the fiscal year. So that's my only. I don't I'm just trying to understand why, and I don't think that this issue would come up before May 1st, so the timing had not really occurred to me, but. Okay.
I would say, wait, but can I just say, I would say the question is, we need to increase, because the school is saying it's going to be a huge amount more so than we had originally expected.
With no federal monies coming.
Yeah, well, let's assume, because nothing's going to happen. I mean, you got the Senate.
No. Something will happen.
No,
but
okay.
We don't need to spend time on that.
But
let's
be pessimistic and nothing happens and we're budgeting accordingly. We have the reserves. I would say we need to lower the refund or returning the money, 400,000 back to stabilization and only put 200. The 200 will go into increasing the reserves up to 800.
But don't take it from legal.
No, and I don't think we should, because Travis made a good point. He has a reason, and we heard it last week, and we could go through it again. But we need to make a decision soon, like tonight. And I think we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. We had the unemployment. Unemployment's probably not going to get fixed because we know our bureaucracy in the state in time for us not to use the money. I mean, probably end up getting it back at the end of the year once they get everything back. But in the meantime, money's got to go out. So how are we going to pay for it? And the same thing with legal. We're going to have claims. We have suits coming that we need to deal with. So the reason we took money from the stabilization fund in the initial first place was we thought the revenues are going to go down and we're going to need it. So why don't we only put $200,000 back and put $200,000 into the reserve? And once everything comes out at the end of the year, we're going to have free cash. We can return the stabilization back to where it should be.
So if we're going to do anything like that, I actually would rather bolster the reserve. I'd rather just take the unemployment down a little bit.
But we already have a reason to keep the unemployment the way it was, based on what Travis was saying.
But if it really was that you didn't want to take, the committee doesn't want to take unemployment down, my second suggestion would be I want to absolutely put the $400,000 back into stabilization, but would be more to fix the articles so we actually take more out of capital and use some of the free cash to bolster the reserve fund that way. If you absolutely didn't spend out of capital before you spend out of stabilization.
I'm fine with that if we want to go to that.
But my preference would be to take down. But my preference and what I will vote for initially would be to, as long if there's a consensus is to take down unemployment.
Yeah, I would prefer to take unemployment down before I take stabilization. I'll tell you why. Simple reason is this is all predicated on having to use we did a lot of this predicated on the requirement that we use the cherry sheet number in the tax recap, things like that. So, the other thing we have to keep in the back of our mind is what happens if there's an aid cut, right? And again, I'm not saying necessarily the magnitude we anticipated, but there's a change in the numbers late in the year. They give us flat aid and then they come in March and say the pandemic's dragging on longer, so take a hit. We bumped unemployment up to $100,000, and originally we'd be adding more to it. And in my mind, the only difference between sticking that money, or not all of it, but I'm saying like putting as I said, let's say 150. So we do 100 in unemployment, and then make the reserve fund 750, right, or 740 technically, because we didn't put the 10,000 back. The only disadvantage, there is no disadvantage to that, in that we can cover the unemployment from there if we need to. The advantage is that that it buys us. Again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of if there's no federal aid, right? There's no federal aid coming, and we need to cover the schools. That gives us enough to cover the schools. Now, again, you say, okay, we get to May 1, we can try to scrape dollars elsewhere. But I just look at it and say, if there's any federal stimulus that comes through, then we've got the reserve fund there, and it can handle anything that unemployment wants to throw at us, and that we need to. Go ahead, Dan.
So the other sort of curveball I would say, which will be to our benefit, is that we modeled 20% 20% decline in local receipts?
We modeled a 10 or I'd have to check. It was
or 15%.
Yes, it was not 20%. I don't believe.
It was 20% year over year. It was 20% off of our assumption, or 20% off of what the actual number was, but
20% off our assumption from FY20. Yes.
So I just pulled up the.
It was 10%. 10% is what we exceeded. 10% from 10% drop from FY20.
Let me put up auto SAR, and it's largely recovered from sort of where it was. So you probably are in a position where you're actually going to be maybe better than.
Right, but that's going to be free cash next year, right?
No, but we would know about that. I'm just saying it's a place where, in theory, if we needed to plug a hole, we could use that in May too.
Well, yes and no, not really, because the tax rate's going to be certified using our local aid number.
Yeah,
our local receipts number.
We'll be certifying based on our assumption before then.
So our tax rate will be certified in December. That's why I said that'll just be free cash next year for FY22.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay.
So, but as I said, I mean, the bottom line from my perspective is I don't really want to necessarily take it from stabilization. All these Article 1 things are all essentially the same pool of money. And some of them, as Travis said, right, we know about some of these expenses already. So fill in all the things we know that are COVID related, right? The ones we don't know are, okay, what's going to happen with the schools? What's going to happen with unemployment, right? And as I said, if you focus on those two as the real kind of variables, the way you can deal with that is by shifting some more of that unemployment to the reserve fund, and then that just gives you greater flexibility.
We don't need to finalize this tonight.
Yes,
Yes, we do.
I thought we could go to bed next 10 days.
No, okay. You want to be that way. I'm not going to, as the chair, I'm going to assert my right as the chair, but we technically have to have the report in by the Friday after Thanksgiving. I assumed that the 6 other members of this committee did not want to meet next Tuesday to be doing and have me finalizing a report on Thanksgiving Day.
Here was my only thought about this one. If we say we want to put 150 more into the reserve fund, right?
Mm-hmm.
We say, Travis, what would your suggestion be for with these other monies? How we do that? And then he comes back with it. I'm trying to sort of not sort of have usurp all the sort of the other sort of boards that are making these requests and everything, and just sort of.
Oh well. If we're literally only talking about unemployment, I mean that's Travis. He's sitting right here.
Okay.
So
I gotta post the warrant, right? So I posted the legal notice 14 days in advance. I gotta post the warrant that was voted last night. So I mean, this is just gonna be a recommendation, right?
Exactly.
Underneath of what you'd like to do that would be different than what's printed. Again, I mean, and that's certainly, I'm just not getting my head around the difference of moving it between unemployment up to the reserve fund. Because of the date of May 1st when it becomes available. I'm just not.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's basically it. It just gives us more.
But it doesn't, though. It doesn't give us flexibility in a sense because we can't use it until May 1st. Once we have.
No. No. Just to be clear, everybody's getting this all wrong. Okay. When we take actions at town meeting in December, if we were to put, let's say we move 150 from unemployment in the list that's there now into the reserve fund. So the reserve fund's now 740, and the unemployment's now an additional 100, right? Okay. What that means is that on, December 6th, theoretically, right, we have a reserve fund that is at $740,000. Anytime after that the schools come to us or anybody comes to us with a COVID-related expense after the CARES runs out, for example, can come to us and fill out a reserve fund request, and we discuss it, approve it, we can appropriate the money. That has nothing to do with May 1st, okay? What I was talking about was after May 1st, from May 1st to July 15th every year, we have the ability as a finance committee under the state statutes to make line item transfers without town meeting approval. That's the superpowers I always refer to at the end of the year, okay? So my point was if we put it in unemployment and then we need it for the schools, we cannot take it from unemployment till May 1st. So if we put it in reserve and we need it for unemployment, we can vote to do a reserve fund transfer to unemployment to do it. We can go one way, but not the other prior to May 1st.
So, okay, that makes sense. But what about, we need the unemployment and we also have 600,000 for the schools, plus what else is out there? We built the reserve for the purposes of everything else, but you're saying, well, we're going to use X amount of dollars from this unemployment, but let's say this unemployment thing doesn't get straightened out. We're paying it out. We're going to be in a hole. So that's why I'm saying, even if we move the benefits, we move the 250 up to the reserve line transfer, we're only moving buckets. We still need additional $200,000 or so to cover everything else, assuming the schools come in asking for $680,000.
Right. Well, there are two big things, right? There are two big things. So you understand the one reason why being in the reserve is different than being in the other buckets, right?
I do. I mean, but
okay, so
the question originally we had, Travis came in and said he needed the additional monies, and we said, okay, that makes sense. I guess why are we changing it for the purpose of
changing it? Gives us access to gives us greater flexibility with the money. That's the
we're not going to need it all. We're not going to.
Right. That was the other thing I was going to say is, right, if you look at the math, you are right in saying that. So if we remove money, we get the flexibility on December 6th as opposed to May 1st. Okay, that's the advantage of that. The question then becomes, okay, well, what if we have more than $740,000 worth of stuff? Because we think there might be. Okay, well, two things happen by moving it up. One is that we have to. The most important thing is to get us to May 1st, right? Because once we get to May 1st with that flexibility, then we can start looking at other things. So if the schools needed 682 to get through June, well, we could probably get to May 1st with 600 or 590 or something. And same with unemployment, right? It's the timing of it, right? And after May 1st, we can then start looking at, okay, what money is there in other budgets? Is there other things? How are things like our benefits budget looking? Things like that, like we do at the end of every year when we sit there and say,
but this is an extraordinary year. My concern would be we're biting ourselves, chopping our nose off, because we really don't know what will happen. We don't know if the 600's too low. We also haven't talked about other departments in town probably coming to us. So my concern, wouldn't it be smarter to at least bump it a little bit? We're more than just what we already have in there, because the schools are already looking at 600. Let's say unemployment doesn't change and we have to pay that out. We're going to have nothing. And assuming, yes, okay, we can move monies around, but let's say hypothetically we can't, because there's no money left in the benefits.
Well, let me ask Travis a question. If you have this, right, what have we been spending on unemployment so far?
So the first bill, I want to say $75,000 was what I used to look out. Again, the list that goes into that's after closing out the previous fiscal year, which also had obviously some, and we had encumbered some monies for. That's how we looked at it. Again, deciphering what is related to fraud means that if the fraud issue gets handled, the $100,000 that we have budgeted for the year is going to probably put us in good shape. And if the fraud issue is not handled by the end of the year, the 250 is a realistic number.
Well, the 250 additional or the 250, because you're talking about adding 250 on top of the 100.
Right.
So you're saying it would be 350 total if the fraud issue is not resolved, or do you think the 250 is a realistic number?
Yeah, no. So it was sort of saying worst case scenario would be getting up into that range if nothing is checked.
Okay, and we get billed on what, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis?
We get sort of true ups on a quarterly basis, and we get reporting more frequently than that. So,
is this unemployment thing like statewide, or is it just us?
It's countrywide, yeah. So yeah. Our initial concern obviously would be a data breach. We checked on that. It appears, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but somebody with the initials BOA, and one of the people who checks your credit, one of the three main ones, if you sort of cross-reference between the two, you find the most common occurrence, and they had data breaches back a few. And the problem, quite frankly, is the fact that they'll allow you to apply for unemployment based on a single point of failure, which is a social security number, and not a lot more information than that. And until they fix that, it's going to be an issue. At the same point, the fact that they're billing us and others based on claims that we can easily prove to be fraudulent is problematic.
The fact that we have to pay out what we know to be fraudulent claims is, it's almost like paying those hackers who take control of your system.
Well, the reason I say this is because if we're paying quarterly, right, then we're going to have the final quarter of the year won't come in till June 30th or June, right? So to the point about even if the fraud continues, right, we're going to have 2 more quarterly payments. I just look at it this way, Vin, which is I agree, right? At some level, we want to try to plan for worst case. I believe that 740 will get us to that worst case spot, because I think that we're and again, I if we had additional monies, I just don't really like the idea of touching stabilization, because I look at it and say, if the state doesn't come through with what they say they're going to come through with, we want to have the ability to tap that and not have to tap our reserves down after just replenishing them, right? So
I agree totally there. It's just we're just borrowing the 250 is what I'm thinking. Because
and that's why I said in theory, right? In theory, and again, I'm not. If we put 100 more into unemployment just to try to make it whole with what we're seeing, right? Then you say, okay, it's just a flexibility thing to me.
Can we just find out where other people are so we know if we have votes, if people want to go one way or the other?
What, Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Whitaker?
Well, what's the motion? What are we doing?
No, we're just having a debate on whether we want to make a motion to modify this. So what are the thoughts? Do we have a consensus motion?
Well, I think we should increase the reserve.
No, I'd like to know from Tim, Michelle, and Mark where they want to get the money from, if they want to take it at all, if they want to increase it all.
Okay, any of you?
So I'm still not clear as to why taking it out of stabilization is such a bad thing. Because I know, Ken, you just said that, but the reality is that if we don't need it, it goes right back. So
no, it doesn't.
Okay.
If we take it out of stabilization, right, and we put it in the reserve fund, it goes to free cash next year, which we then can appropriate back to stabilization.
And rating agencies don't love to see you using stabilization, especially if you don't need to, and moving in and out of it and everything like that.
Yeah, right. The rating agencies look very unfavorably on that.
I definitely can understand that. So let's take it a step back then and say we're putting money into it. Why don't we just not put money into it, or not as much? I mean, maybe I'm thinking way too basically, but it's
putting back in what we just took out.
Well, we're putting a little more in. We're putting more in than we took out, but
so at the very least, the amount that the differential there. So say we put all of it back, and I'm sorry, I don't have the number right in front of me, but that the amount we're putting back in addition, how much do you know off the top of your head how much that is?
It's probably 484 because it's the overlay money. So, but the only hesitation I have with that is that I look at that as that's our insurance policy against having to draw it down from our prior year level if state aid changes. My other worst scenario that I'm worrying about is that the state says, we're going to keep local aid. We swear up and down we're going to keep local aid because we're banking on that money coming from the feds, right? And then the money doesn't come from the feds. And then we're stuck in 2 ways, right? One is we have to pay the school bills because we don't get the Fed money, right? And we have to pay these other bills. And we have to potentially cover local aid shortfalls. So to me, that 484 that's the local aid shortfall piece.
So I go back to, we had water treatment plant, and instead of using it, borrowing money, and we're using free cash. And if I recall, Travis, you were saying by us tying it up, we might not need the 850, but now we're tying that 850 up as opposed to just increasing the debt, the borrowing ability. In which case, hey, we might need it or we might not need it. So if anything, I would suggest we do something with that. and then deal with our stabilization, because it goes back to, this is water treatment plant is a capital asset, 20 years plus that we're going to need it. Why are we using free cash for something like that? Makes more sense to borrow the money, especially because rates are so low right now.
Yeah, well, not for governments, but ours are already interest-free, remember? Our tax-free bonds.
Well, if I can just say something to Mark.
SRF.
Mark, we have to worry about next year.
Yeah. That's the other reason about
Because
stabilization.
next year, the money is put aside for next year because the state is promising to hold this year harmless, but they're not saying anything about next year.
So maybe I'm not.
So think of the stabilization as being for next year.
Maybe I'm not making my thoughts clear here, but so we took out what, 400 in July.
July, yep.
And we're going to put back in 484. So
no, we're going to put back 400 plus 484. We're putting back 484 additional.
Okay, so can we put back, like, say, just 400 and keep that 84 out, so that way we know we're at least covered for the schools?
We're putting in 884,000 right now.
Right.
So we have room to adjust that if we're just going back to where it was. So it's not like we don't have the ability to do it. We have the overlay surplus and or the 400,000 from the levy.
It just gets, if you don't, it just gets sort of tied up into free cash and delayed when it's there to be used.
But we're talking about trying to get through the end of the year with all this we don't knows, including the unemployment, including the schools maybe coming with 680,000 plus. We don't have any other reserves. And if you recall, we've used reserves the last couple of years. It's not like we have the money just sitting there doing nothing, in which case I would say, well, highly unlikely. But we also have COVID. So we don't really know what we're going to need. Wouldn't it make more sense to reserve it, get the generalized stabilization back to where we originally had, 400,000, and then the overlay, instead of putting it back to stabilization, we use it or just increase it by 200. So then we're only putting back 284. So 684 will go back to stabilization in Article 3.
So what are your thoughts, Tim?
Then lost me right there at the end. So you want to put 400 back into stabilization. You want to take 200 from the overlay, put that into reserves.
Yep, and so we still have 284. So I'm saying 684 goes into stabilization, which is more than we took out originally.
I mean, that's the one that that's the one that's resonating with me the most right now. There's just so many uncertainties, and the whole point of stabilization is to help with economic uncertainty. So why not use that 200 in our reserves to give us that flexibility?
Michelle?
I don't know. I'm more nervous about next year than this year.
Well, we have the reserves for next year. We have a fair amount, so it will get us through. Even if they cut the aid, we looked at it this year because we were dire and we cut 20%, and that's probably what is going to happen. And we can weather it. And the question is, what are they going to do for raises and for the different bodies? But that, I think we could weather it. It's either, my concern is us getting through this year. We'll deal with next year because we'll have free cash. All this, if we don't spend it now, this is going to roll into free cash. So it's not like we're not, spending it willy-nilly. It's just, let's get through this year. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when all this COVID vaccines are going to get done. It won't get done by the May, as we know. So let's be pessimistic and just plan for the worst and get through it.
Do our reserves go into free cash or do they stay in reserves?
It stays in reserves.
They stay in reserves.
Right.
I mean, do you mean our reserve fund? That goes to free cash.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's
So
true.
and that's the point, is if you don't put it into stabilization and you don't spend it, then it goes back in a year later, so to speak, because then what happens is,
Right.
in the reserve fund, the year would close out. If we didn't spend it, it would go to free cash, get certified, and then at next October's town meeting, if we have it in October, we'd be going back in and saying, put money back in stabilization. So Travis's head is about to explode from all this.
Sparks are coming.
Okay. So
No, I would just, I understand the conversation. I think, I'm comfortable with the way the warrant's written, but I understand where your conversation's gone, and we can't have all of the answers looking ahead. I think Article 1 sort of protects us, I think as best we can, but I understand there's other ways to slice this pie. So,
the real question is, the other thing I guess we should point out is that the schools said they were comfortable with the 600,000 reserve fund level, but that's probably assuming that they're figuring they could scrape up the 82,000 if they needed it somehow, right? Or that they figure that they'll have it, right? So
if we use up 600 just for the schools, what else are we going to do when we have all these other departments we have to deal with?
No, I agree. But I'm just saying that that's just worth pointing out that they were comfortable with 600. So, go ahead, Dan.
Take 100 from insurance and 100 from lower by 100 what we're going to put back into stabilization and call it a night.
So 100 from unemployment, 100 from stabilization?
Yes.
Okay. We'll go with that.
I'd be amenable to that.
I'm really tired.
Well, I guess the question too, my concern, Travis, what is your thought? Because he's the one who's going to have to ultimately live with it, at least through May.
Who, Travis?
Yeah.
No, not through May, because if it starts killing us, we can put more money back into the unemployment through the reserve fund. It's not, because
right, that's the flexibility argument, right? You can only go one way before May.
And we still think it will be taken care of, the fraud bit will be taken care of at some point, because if all towns are going through this and having to expend significant amounts of cash, the state at some point or somebody's going to have to step in and basically say,
Well, they're probably happy because the unemployment's probably upside down right now, so.
Yeah.
Because they're paying these people for fraud, and then they're going to have to try to collect it back.
Yeah.
Their money's going out.
My comfort level is I think the stabilization one is the only one. Obviously, that's the point of the conversation. But whether it's in unemployment or the reserve, I sort of see it the same, and I don't have an issue with the May 1st date, so it doesn't really move the needle for me. The stabilization point, I just always get concerned about complicated motions and things of that nature. But we can certainly get over it. So if that's what the finance committee is going to make a recommendation on, that's obviously.
Well, if we did that, we'd have to change our recommendations for 1 and 3. Yes. So it would just be 2 motions that we'd need to change, right?
So I make a motion to open up number 3, Article 3.
Okay. So reconsider our recommendations for Articles 1 and 3. Okay,
I make a motion to reconsider our recommendations for Articles 1 and 3.
Okay, let's take a vote on the reconsideration request. If there's no further debate, Ms. Ziemer?
Aye.
Mr. Alfred?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
And I will vote yes, even though my vote doesn't matter.
It always matters.
I'm just saying it's like the motion had carried. Okay, so if we do the compromise, then our recommendation for Article 1 would be.
Sorry, can I just say, if I'm thinking about the recommendation, would you rather increase the balance of the general stabilization fund or the CapEx fund? Because if you reduce the amount going into the CapEx fund in Article 4, the general stabilization fund is going to give you more flexibility in FY22 if that's Michelle's concern.
So I think we're going to lower the amount that we're going to put into stabilization.
General stabilization.
Okay, his point is, do you want to take it from?
Well, what's easiest? I think it's stabilization's easiest. It's only one line, as opposed to worrying about all the CapEx stuff.
No.
Well, the CapEx, no, because that's Article 4, right? It would be Article 4.
Money going in.
Sorry, I didn't mean to complicate it. It's just that, right, instead of Article 3 that's impacting the balance of the general stabilization fund, you could reduce the amount that's going into, by recommendation, obviously, the amount that's going into the CapEx fund.
That was my original thought, but I had forgotten that we were putting a decent amount of money back into the general stabilization. So let's just keep it this way because we've opened it up already and
Okay.
We'll
Okay.
have a vaccine. We'll all be fine by.
That's right.
I'm knocking on wood for all of us.
That's right. Well, okay. So if we want to move forward with what was discussed, then our recommendation for Article 1 would be that we recommend that the town, these are all, let me see, where are we taking these from? These are all raise and appropriate, yes. So we would raise and appropriate the amounts shown in the table in Article 1 with the following two exceptions. The reserve fund would be to raise and appropriate 140,000 or
240.
240,000, yes, $240,000 additional for the reserve fund, and raise and appropriate $150,000 for unemployment insurance.
So the whole bottom line comes up to $664,800.
So the bottom line would be, yes, $664,800. Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on that recommendation? Okay, hearing none, let's proceed to a vote. Ms. Ziemer.
Aye.
Mr. Alfred.
Aye.
Mr. Murphy.
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker.
Aye.
Mr. Maxwell.
Yes.
I guess I'll join the group chat and say aye, so that, okay.
Travis, not a pain in the ass at all.
Yeah, see that, well, no, I'll say something after we're done with this. Let's get this done first, okay? So then our recommendation for Article 3 would be that we recommend that the town appropriate.
To make a motion to reconsider Article 3.
We already did.
That was the first, we did both.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the motion for Article 3 would be that we recommend that the town appropriate $384,000 from the overlay and raise and appropriate $400,000 for the stabilization fund for a total of $784,400.
So move. No. Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on this recommendation? Okay, hearing none, let's proceed to a vote. Ms. Ziemer.
Aye.
Mr. Alfred.
Aye.
Mr. Murphy.
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker.
Aye.
Mr. Maxwell.
Yes.
And I vote yes. And I'll just say for the record, Travis, blame the schools. Because I was thinking about that. This only got reopened because they came in and said $682,000, right? If they had said $400,000, I think we would have been fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have if they come asking for $680,000 at the end of the year, then I will, I don't know.
Eat your hat.
Well, I will tell you that under ordinary circumstances, I wouldn't have been as willing to do something like this, but I'm more concerned that if things aren't under control, like this is one of those fool me once, fool me twice things, right? We got screwed last May by not having a town meeting. So I just we purposely in July said, let's plan for a no October town meeting just in case. And so I think that this is just let's plan for a no May town meeting just in case. And obviously prior to this pandemic, we never would have planned and said, we're going to assume we're not going to have a town meeting. So I think this is just a short-term thing. Okay, so with this in mind, the last thing we have to do is approve the warrant message.
Wait, stop. We were going to talk about consent agenda.
Oh, we can do that too, but let's do the message first because that's the other thing I want to make sure gets approved tonight. Okay, so I can modify to reflect the votes we just took. So obviously I'll modify the reserve section, with the recommendations. I will
Capital change from yours.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said that I have to update all the stuff that we voted from. Yep. That's why I said there are a bunch of numbers in there that have to be updated. From the good thing is I didn't really mention the Article 1 stuff. So So we're probably good on that. I just have to change the reserve lines to put the new reserve money in there. So other than that, does anybody have any other than the corrections we talked about earlier, which is adding a little more color on the total capital spending? And I have to go back and look at the tape of what the sentence was, but we were going to put the sentence in there to further clarify the reason for the higher spending.
Do you want to emphasize the 484 coming back from the tax levy or the overlay?
Going back into reserves, that's...
Well, I mean...
No, I'm saying that as far as the tax thing, that's up at the top, right? I have that in bold.
Yep. Okay.
So that's already covered. So, okay.
Yep. No, I'm fine.
Anything else? So if everybody's fine with the modification we made earlier, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the warrant message as amended earlier and with numbers rechecked and updated to match our recommendations.
So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion on the warrant message? Okay, let's proceed to a vote. Ms. Zemer?
Aye.
Mr. Alfred?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
And I vote yes. I have to. This is like, what is it? The writing in good faith. Since I penned it, I have to vote for it. So, yes, Mr. Ahern.
I want to check one thing because I was taking notes, but I'm very tired. You had increased Article 1 by $100,000 by removing it from Article 3.
Yes.
Out of the appropriation, specifically the raise in, was it the free cash?
Out of the overlay. I did the overlay to 384. Yes.
So overlay now supports the operating budget?
Yeah, we can change it if you want it to be raised and appropriate. It doesn't really matter from our standpoint. It's just, I just took it out of the first item.
It's not a problem. I just want to make sure. So the actual increase to Article 1 is 100,000. The increase to the line for the
reserve fund is 200,000. Yes.
Okay. All right. I understand. Thank you.
Okay. And as I said, if you think, I mean, when you think about it, yeah, you can argue that it's being used for but it's not really operating. This is just being into reserve. So, you know what I mean? It's not like we're appropriating it to a budget for salaries, right? We're just putting it there in reserve. So I didn't really care about which source it came from Article 3. So
okay, and then just so, and you and I will work on the document if I can switch in any way. The way that the motion will be written then is just so I understand, because Article 1 obviously has 30 lines essentially.
Oh, you're right. Forget it. We got to revote Article 3. We got to do it as raise and appropriate. Otherwise, it complicates the motion for Article 1. So let's revisit Article 3 quickly.
I make a motion to revisit our recommendation.
Okay, and seconded by Dan, I heard?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Let's proceed to a vote. Ms. Zemer?
Aye.
Mr. Alfred?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, so the motion for Article 3 wants to be that we appropriate 480, our recommendation is that we appropriate 484,000 from the overlay and raise and appropriate $300,000 for the stabilization fund. Okay, any further discussion on that? Let's proceed to vote. Ms. Zemer?
Aye.
Mr. Alfred?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, that makes it easier for you now. Now everything in Article 1 is raise and appropriate, so you're good. See, I can help you once in a while. Okay, so now Article 1 should be raise and appropriate for that whole amount. The amount goes up by 100,000, and the Article 3 just goes to 300,000 from tax levy. You good?
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking of the Finance Committee motion underneath. Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, I'll put that together for you for the report. So I'll tell you, make sure it's worded right. Yep. Okay, so we got that. Now, what was the last thing, Michelle? We were talking about
consent agenda.
Oh, the consent agenda. Okay, so with which articles would we be fine with a consent agenda for?
So there's really not much. I was kind of looking through it. You did 2, and then not until you get to basically like 16, the road acceptances, and 17, the sales surplus, if we still have that. And I guess the town hall easement, if that is going to be, maybe I'm looking at it. Okay. So the 16 and 17, honestly, it's kind of a waste because all the other ones have spending attached to it. And I don't think that those should be part of the consent agenda.
Yeah, so let's see. So 15, 14. Yeah, I was going to say the last few. Yeah, it's kind of, that's true. Most of these are all these studies.
It's like 3. It's basically like 3 by the time you get to it. And I think by the time that Bill has to explain it all, he might as well just have gone through them and just vote. I mean, at least they're not going to be controversial, so we might as well just...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess you're right. It would just be like 1, 2, and 3, or 2. Yeah, 1.
No, not 1.
Well, not 1. I guess, yeah, 2. You could do 2, 3, and 4, right? Those are just the putting money away ones.
But no, I mean, you really want to do putting money into stabilization and capital? I mean,
Yeah, no, I know. Well, we'll see. I guess we can consider. Obviously, we don't need to take a formal position on that now. That's just between now and town meeting. The select board can propose a consent agenda, and we can say if we go.
My recommendation would be not to do it, just because I think. But if you did do it, it'd be 2, 16 and 17. Yeah, I mean, that's true. It wouldn't be much. So, okay. Well, what do other people think? Do they kind of agree that we should, I mean, as I said, we can just wait till they propose something and then weigh in on it, or we can just say that we don't see a consent agenda helping us all that much in this case, because it is only 16 articles to begin with. So we can hopefully cruise through some of these with minimal debate. So is that the consensus? Give me a thumbs up, everybody, if you want to just wait and see what they say. Okay, so we'll do that. So if that's the case, Travis, do you have anything else you want us to talk about warrant related? Okay, we'll let everybody get some sleep in. So if that's the case and nobody has anything else to bring up, I'll entertain the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, good. We can talk about this after we adjourn. It's okay. So, okay, it's not subject to debate. So take a motion, take a vote. Ms. Zemer?
Aye.
Mr. Alfred?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Yes, and I vote yes. That concludes the Tuesday, November 17th meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you heard, we'll be likely issuing our report or planning to issue our report on the warrant for the December 5th town meeting this Friday. So if you want to see what we've been talking about and see it in print or see it virtually, go to the town's website after this Friday. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night. Don't anybody go anywhere.